Welcome to Audio Novel. If you enjoy my work, don't forget to like and subscribe. To access advanced chapters or support the author, visit their official page, link is in the description. Thank you for being part of this journey. Chapter 226, Chapter 226. Just as Irina was brimming with confidence and viewers were amazed by the speed of Mach 6 missiles, believing that Messiah was done for. Tony fell silent, Eric's face changed, and Professor Charles was anxious, wanting to rush to the Cerebro room in an attempt to save Messiah. Meanwhile, the sorcerers of Camartage lamented that one of the only two Omega mutants was about to die, as the missiles approached Messiah. Just when everyone imagined Messiah struggling against the missiles and eventually succumbing to them, an astonishing scene appeared. In the broadcast footage, Messiah faced the direction from which the missiles were coming, seemingly watching them. The next second, his figure blurred. With a swoosh, Messiah disappeared from his original position. What happened? The technician looked shocked and quickly zoomed out the live feed. As the view expanded, everyone finally saw what had happened. A black figure was flying at incredible speed in the sky. Behind the black figure, the missiles were following closely like a shadow, but no matter how they pursued, they couldn't catch up to the moving shadow. Is that black figure? Irina's face froze, filled with shock. Is that Messiah? Is he flying? Am I seeing things? Messiah's flying faster than the missiles. Aren't those missiles moving at Mach 6? What is going on? Viewers were in disbelief, stunned, staring at Messiah's erratic UFO-like movements in the sky. Stark Tower. Tony was dumbfounded, and next to him, Pepper Potts covered her mouth, exclaiming instinctively, "Tony, my God." Apparently, she realized something, feeling extremely shocked. Hearing her exclamation, Tony quickly recovered, immediately saying, "Jarvis, calculate the exact speed of the missiles and Messiah." "Yes, sir," Jarvis replied. Soon, Jarvis estimated the data and said, "Sir, based on calculations, those missiles are moving at approximately Mach 5.9, and Mr. Messiah's speed is." In the tension between Tony and Pepper, Jarvis's voice continued. Mach 7. As soon as the words fell, Tony and Pepper were overwhelmed. Messiah's speed had actually surpassed that of the missiles. Mach 7, Jarvis, are you sure? Tony was questioning reality. If he remembered correctly, the last time Messiah was pursued by missiles, his speed didn't even reach the speed of sound. So, what was happening now? Mach 7. Originally, in his imagination, Messiah's speed couldn't possibly outpace those missiles. He would soon be caught, and then. Now. A living being's speed was surpassing that of those metallic missiles, reaching Mach 7. Was that even reasonable? Tony was bewildered. Suddenly, he thought of something and questioned reality once more. The rumor of Messiah growing stronger over time, with no visible limit to his potential, could it be true? Had Messiah's speed increased to Mach 7 in such a short time? Tony couldn't believe it, he would rather think it was all an illusion than believe in such an absurd existence. Brotherhood of Mutants. Magneto stood up, his body stiffened, mouth agape, eyes widened. This kid. Am I seeing things? Apparently, he realized something. X-Mansion. Logan and others were rushing Professor X to the Cerebro room and were almost there. At this moment, whether it was Cyclops Scott or Logan and the others, they all unknowingly stopped, staring at the broadcast on the professor's tablet in a daze. The Mach 6 missiles couldn't catch up with Messiah. "Professor, is there something wrong with the live feed?" Aurora asked cautiously. "Yes." Logan agreed incredulously. Professor Charles smiled wryly and said, "I think we aren't mistaken. This is how the live broadcast is. Messiah, his speed." He trailed off, his heart filled only with shock. Logan and the others were emotionally stirred. At that moment, Professor X murmured, "I think we've underestimated Messiah's potential." Logan and the others were stunned, simultaneously amazed and confused. They were all mutants, so why was Messiah so incredible? Was this the power of an Omega mutant? They thought, feeling both envious and bitter. Meanwhile, in Camartage, all the sorcerers were feeling uneasy. Messiah's speed was actually faster than the missiles. Caecilius sighed, "No wonder this Messiah is called an Omega mutant alongside the White Knight. With such an exaggerated speed, he was indeed abnormal. No matter how long they practiced magic, they could never achieve such an inhuman speed. At that moment, ordinary viewers began to understand what was happening. This can't be real. It's fake. There's no way Messiah's that fast. The missiles can't even catch up. This is beyond Mach 6. How fast is that? While viewers were in disbelief, Syd, who was effortlessly dodging the missiles, was in a good mood. Indeed, with the speed boost, these once threatening missiles were no longer a threat. Floating and flying within a certain range was a steady state, with almost no energy consumption. Under these circumstances, he could circle around these missiles for days. With the speed of these missiles, there was no way they could catch up. And when their fuel ran out, they would be destroyed without any action on his part. Of course, that was just a thought. He didn't plan to keep these missiles around forever. Aside from worrying that dragging things out would prompt the military to bring faster missiles, he also didn't want to keep taking hits without striking back. End of chapter. Chapter 227, Chapter 227. The wind howled around him. Syd's eyes flickered as thoughts formed in his mind. He glanced at the missiles pursuing him and silently observed the direction they were coming from. Then, without drawing anyone's attention, his movements began to shift subtly, moving closer in the direction from which the missiles were launched. 8 kilometers away, at a military base, a group of officers and staff suddenly turned pale. Not good, this Messiah is trying to. It was clear that they had realized what Syd intended to do. But even though they had realized it, it was too late. They could only watch as Messiah flew towards their military base. Fire missiles to intercept him. Dozens of officers in the base shouted in panic. Under their watchful eyes, nearly 100 missiles were fired, all aimed at Messiah in the distance. Seeing this, both the officers and the staff members breathed a sigh of relief. If Messiah had simply fled without a predictable trajectory, there would be nothing they could do. Now that Messiah's target was clear, heading straight for them, it seemed that dodging the overwhelming barrage of missiles would be difficult. If he tried to evade them, he would be forced back. If he continued toward the base, surely one of those many missiles would hit him. If even one missile hit, Messiah's speed would be reduced, and with more waves of missiles following, how could he possibly withstand them? Messiah could very well die. After all, these missiles were different from the ones used last time, they were much more powerful. In such circumstances, with so many missiles bombarding him, even a god would fall, let alone Messiah, an Omega-level mutant. As they imagined the outcome, the personnel in the base hastily packed their belongings, preparing to evacuate. As they were preparing to evacuate, Syd frowned while looking at the incoming barrage of missiles from afar. The next moment, after a brief thought, his expression turned cold. He glanced at the blazing sun overhead and ignored the missiles. Trying his best to dodge, he continued flying toward the military base without changing direction. 5 kilometers. 4 kilometers. 3 kilometers. Syd kept approaching the military base. Meanwhile, seeing Messiah flying straight toward them without any hesitation, the officers and staff preparing to evacuate wore stunned expressions. The next second, however, their surprise and panic turned into delight. As Messiah approached the base within 2 kilometers, the missile operators detonated the missiles. The missiles exploded, one after another. Boom, boom, boom. Terrifying shockwaves erupted, flames, heat waves, and high-speed shrapnel all blasted toward Messiah. For a moment, the sky seemed to be filled with fireworks. Syd's fast-moving figure was indeed affected by the missile explosions, and his speed slowed slightly. Seeing this, the military personnel were overjoyed. Irina, who had been in a terrible mood due to public backlash, also had her eyes light up. Under the watchful eyes of countless viewers and Tony, a missile finally struck Syd. Boom. A terrifying explosion engulfed Syd's figure. Messiah was done for. Seeing the numerous missiles following behind, both the officers at the military base and host Irina felt a surge of excitement. The ordinary viewers who hated mutants also wore smiles. Stark Tower. Tony was filled with confusion. He couldn't understand why Messiah acted so impulsively when he could have escaped with his speed and sought revenge later. He looked at the hundreds of missiles approaching Messiah at high speed and fell into silence. This kid. So many missiles. Faced with such a bombardment, even Messiah, an Omega-level mutant, wouldn't survive. At that moment, Charles and others grew anxious, while Caecilius and others at Camartage were left in shock. They had never expected the situation to escalate so quickly. As they were caught up in their thoughts, countless missiles exploded simultaneously. Boom, boom, boom. The unimaginable shockwaves spread quickly through the air. Messiah. While the officers celebrated, Irina let out a sigh of relief, viewers marveled at the missile explosions, and Charles and others worried. Suddenly, a blinding light appeared. The sun above seemed to shine brighter. Instantly, the light expanded at an astonishing speed. The expanding explosion shockwave froze, then everything, flames, shockwaves, and high-velocity shrapnel, began to disintegrate, dissolve, and vanish. In the blink of an eye, the extensive explosion shockwave disappeared. In the sky, there was only a figure suspended quietly, radiating brilliant light, exuding an aura of mysterious majesty, as if merging with all of creation, like a deity. If that were all, it would be remarkable enough. But after obliterating the missile shockwaves, the light continued expanding without stopping. At an incredible speed, it spread to the distance. Everything in its path, dirt, plants, animals, metal, all turned into particles, rapidly dissolving into nothingness. 1 kilometer. 2 kilometers. It extended all the way to the military base. The staff and officers, who had been celebrating in excitement as if they had seen Messiah being bombed to death, stared blankly at the light that appeared before them. Impossible. Muttered an officer. No, 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 this can't be real. Under their terrified and vacant gazes, everything in the base began to disintegrate, piece by piece. By the time they snapped back to reality, everything in the base had vanished, metal and all. At this moment, only they remained, left deliberately to slowly experience their own demise. Ah! Terrified screams echoed. The officers and staff stared blankly at their bodies as they slowly disappeared. We were still 2 kilometers away. No. In despair and disbelief, they could only watch as their bodies turned into nothingness. Watching the broadcasted scene, Tony and the others were left stunned. End of chapter. Chapter 228, Chapter 228. 120 reviews reached. Next goal, 150 reviews. Staring at the screen, where the terrifying explosion shockwave was disintegrated by the light, were the earth, plants. Even a large military base disappeared without a trace in an instant. At this moment, countless people fell silent. In the vast open space, only a figure emitting dazzling light remained, quietly suspended there. Seeing Messiah, who seemed like a deity, Irina could only feel disbelief. The terrifying aftershocks from hundreds of missile explosions were wiped out so effortlessly. Wiped out without any resistance, without even a splash. These were shockwaves from hundreds of missiles, and they were just gone like that. Irina almost doubted what she was seeing. Of course, if that were all, she would be merely astonished, amazed by Messiah's power, being able to easily clear away such terrifying missile shockwaves. But what happened next completely exceeded her expectations. Everything within 2 kilometers, including the military base, disappeared into nothingness. All that remained was a huge crater. Irina's eyes widened in terror. This power was simply not human. The ordinary people who hated or looked down on mutants found their smiles disappearing, replaced only by astonishment and fear. Did Messiah unleash that power again? Wiping out several kilometers worth of things. Was the time he was chased by missiles and looked so pathetic all just an act? Did he pretend to be weak and deceive us again? Looking at the 2-kilometer-wide crater, countless viewers began to question their perception of reality. Stark Tower. Pepper covered her mouth, unable to speak. Tony was bewildered. How could a person's body possess such terrifying power? This wasn't just some minor damage but the complete erasure of a massive area. Like the ordinary people, he, too, thought of the same question. Did Messiah hide his true strength before? Did he pretend to be so pathetic during the missile attacks just to toy with them? Moreover, could it be that the power displayed just now, which erased everything within 2 kilometers, wasn't even Messiah's true strength? He had some evidence for this. Tony still remembered clearly that, in the beginning, Messiah had directly erased an entire city. Compared to that, erasing 2 kilometers seemed insignificant. Since then, Messiah had never displayed that level of power again, as if that time had been a mere coincidence. So, could it be that everything since then was an act, and he had been pretending to be weak all along? In reality, his true strength might allow him to easily erase a city. Perhaps even erasing a city wasn't his limit, he had never truly unleashed his full power. Recalling it, every time Messiah faced danger, somehow, he always got through safely. The more Tony thought about it, the more fearful the implications became. Could such a person really exist in this world? Tony's heart wavered. And if Messiah was like this, then what about the White Knight? Could he also be hiding his strength? At that moment, Tony couldn't help but recall recent news. The phenomenon that had enveloped the entire Earth some time ago had been attributed to the White Knight. Could it be that the true power of the White Knight was enough to destroy the Earth easily? Could this be the true power of an Omega-level mutant? If the White Knight was like this, could Messiah also be the same? Had they all underestimated the power of Omega-level mutants? The more he thought about it, the faster Tony's heart raced, unable to believe it all. Pepper noticed his strange expression and asked in confusion, "Tony, what's wrong?" Tony took a deep breath, then turned to Pepper, sharing his suspicions with her. Pepper, who initially didn't understand, instantly gasped, mumbling, "Tony, are you joking?" "No, I'm not joking." Tony shook his head, then said seriously, "Did you notice that Messiah's flight speed was Mach 7? At that speed, how could his exposed body withstand the pressure of high-speed flight? Even the world's most advanced fighter jets can't reach that speed. What does that mean? It means that Messiah's physical strength could far exceed our expectations. But for so long, Messiah hasn't revealed even a bit of that, he hasn't shown it at all. If I hadn't sensed something was wrong just now and thought back to Messiah's past, I wouldn't have noticed." Listening to Tony's words, Pepper once again covered her mouth, her heart filled with shock. If this speculation was true. At that moment, Pepper felt a chill. Brotherhood of Mutants. Magneto, Mystique, and even Charles, Logan, and others from the X-Mansion had their anxious expressions frozen. The shockwaves from hundreds of missile explosions, and everything in that vast area, had vanished. "This kid," Logan said with a mix of laughter and tears. "Is he playing with us? Why didn't he do this earlier, making us worry so much? We worried about him for nothing." After laughing and complaining, Logan suddenly asked, "How strong is this kid, exactly?" With that question, Cyclops and others fell silent, exchanging glances, their faces filled with confusion and shock. Camartage. Caecilius and over a dozen sorcerers in yellow robes felt their emotions surging. The earlier Mach 7 speed compared to the current terrifying scene seemed almost. "Is this the true reason why Messiah is called an Omega-level mutant?" Caecilius murmured. The group of sorcerers had their emotions stirred. While everyone was lost in thought, the light spreading 2 kilometers had nearly disappeared in the satellite footage. The 2-kilometer crater clearly came into view. As the light completely dissipated and the last bit of haze disappeared, they noticed something strange. Within the 2 kilometers, apart from the brilliant figure of Messiah, there shouldn't have been any survivors. Yet, they saw another person in the crater. With the advanced satellites zoomed in view, they clearly saw the clothes this person wore. The person was in a military uniform, with a very strong build. A soldier. End of chapter. Chapter 229, Chapter 229. 1000 PS reached. Next goal, 1500. Just as countless people were thinking this, Messiah's figure suddenly moved and disappeared from his original position. Boom. A terrifying sonic boom echoed. In the empty 2-kilometer crater, Michaela looked dazed and terrified, scanning the barren surroundings. "I'm not dead." Michaela was both relieved and confused. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind appeared. Ah! He was blown off balance by the gust, rolling on the ground several times. If Syd hadn't stopped at a distance, Michaela didn't know what state he would be in. Messiah. Michaela had just lifted his head when he saw Messiah floating in the distance. Seeing this, his legs trembled, and his face was filled with fear. Glancing at the surviving officer, Syd's eyes showed no surprise. He had deliberately left this person alive. The reason was simple, he wanted to ask this person about the locations of other military bases. With that in mind, he said coldly, "Tell me, where is the nearest military base?" As he spoke, his right hand began to glow faintly white. Michaela initially wanted to refuse, but seeing the glow, a shadow in his mind re-emerged, his body trembling as he remembered the people who had died moments before. In his reactive fear, he quickly said, I'll tell you. Hearing this, Syd lowered his hand. Soon, he had obtained the location of the nearest military base. Syd's figure moved, disappearing from his original position. Spatial transfer experience +1. Reappearing behind the officer, Syd grabbed the back of his uniform. Like picking up a small kitten, Syd easily lifted the men and flew toward the distant military base. As he flew, Syd checked the energy within his body and found he still had about 20% left, which made him breathe a sigh of relief. Luckily, he had controlled the output of Sunshine earlier and cut off the energy supply just in time. Otherwise, even the remaining 20% would have been drained by the Omega-level ability, Sunshine. Syd felt a bit regretful. No matter the situation, Sunshine always consumed so much energy, and he never had the opportunity to fully utilize it. If it were level 2 or level 3, it would be fine, but now, at level 4, using Sunshine to its full extent required a lot more energy. Originally, when Sunshine first reached level 4, its range barely reached 1 kilometer. With his abilities improving over time and the enhancement from Divinity and Divine Light power, Sunshine's range had directly doubled, reaching over 2 kilometers. I wonder what level 5 Sunshine would be like. Flying with the men, Syd couldn't help but feel curious and look forward to it. He had always felt that Sunshine's power had never truly been unleashed, and he suspected that reaching level 5 might allow it to show its true strength. Who knew when Sunshine would reach level 5? Thinking expectantly, Syd turned his gaze to the officer in his grip and asked, "What kind of defenses does that military base have?" Having been attacked again, Syd certainly didn't plan to hold back anymore. He was preparing to attack some bases as well. Of course, while he had such thoughts, he wasn't foolish enough to charge into a military base when his energy wasn't fully recovered. Moreover, some military bases had dangerous things that he couldn't deal with at the moment. Like nuclear bombs. Syd planned to target a few weaker military bases first before the military could respond. At the moment, his flying speed wasn't too fast, so the officer could still speak. However, the officer seemed hesitant, his eyes flickering, clearly deep in thought. Syd narrowed his eyes slightly, and as if realizing something, a crimson light flashed in his pupils. In the next instant, his mental power surged forth, flooding into the officer's mind. It only took a moment for the man's expression to become blank. Then, like a bamboo tube pouring out beans, he began describing the nearby bases and the situation of the nearest city. After listening to what he said, Syd frowned slightly. There's only one military base nearby that meets my requirements. Looking up at the sky, Syd sharply sensed that something in the sky was observing him. No doubt, it was a satellite. Syd shook his head. It seemed he could only destroy the closest military base for now, and that base happened to be manageable in his current state. As for the other bases, they would have to wait, who knew what kind of preparations those other bases might have for him. If he went there now, they might have explosions waiting for him. Besides, military bases were usually in remote, uninhabited areas, which gave the military more opportunities to prepare. As he thought, Syd couldn't help but recall the officer who had appeared recently, the one with the ability to teleport. There was almost no doubt that the person was still alive and possibly hadn't even been at the recently destroyed base. He asked specifically about the man's information, and the officer began to tell him what he knew. Now, Syd knew who that teleporting officer was. A modified human using mutant X genes, huh? Syd frowned. This wasn't surprising to him. Those military researchers always liked to experiment with X genes. In the process, many modified humans were created. For example, there were numerous modified versions using Logan's genes, and Deadpool was one of them. At the same time, he wasn't concerned about this genetic technology. No matter how advanced it was, it couldn't threaten him. Using his genes for modification was even more impossible. The complexity of his genes was beyond comprehension. Even if given hundreds of years, they wouldn't be able to decode them. In fact, Syd doubted whether anyone could even withstand his genes. Especially with the addition of Asgardian bloodline, it became even more mysterious and complex, reaching an unscientific level. Could humans really use technology to harness it? Syd shook his head. After these thoughts, he returned his focus to the officer. As expected, the officer wasn't in the nearby base. The officer beside him said, "Leonard is in another important military base, supposedly with some important figures." While Michaela explained, Syd continued flying, soon arriving at another military base. End of chapter. Chapter 230, Chapter 230. Bonus chapter. Thank you all for your support. Check up my others' fanfics in my profile. Listening to Michaela's words, Syd frowned. As expected, the guy with the teleportation ability wasn't there. It made sense. Since they had chosen to ambush him here, they wouldn't have stayed. The people in the destroyed base earlier were probably just insignificant foot soldiers. He could discern some of this from the officer's words. For instance, the officer only knew about some unimportant military bases. As for the important ones, he had only heard vague mentions and didn't know their exact locations. While deep in thought, Syd's flying figure came to a stop. He looked up and saw a military base in the distance, coming into view. Carrying the officer, Syd flew over. On his way there, he saw chaos in the base. Many people were panicking, trying to escape. He even saw a helicopter leaving the base, seemingly attempting to flee. Clearly, they knew he was coming. Without hesitation, Syd's hand began to glow blue. Spirit Beam Experience +1. In the next moment, a blue energy beam appeared. A flash of blue light. 100 meters away, the rotor blades of the black helicopter buzzed as it flew away from the base. Boom. In almost the blink of an eye, the blue beam cut through the helicopter. With a swish, the helicopter split in two and then exploded like fireworks in the sky. After eliminating the helicopter, Syd moved his right hand, still channeling the spirit beam, towards the military base. At this moment, the faces of the personnel and officers in the base were filled with despair and shock. Messiah is actually coming here? Why is this happening? Somebody save us! Watching this scene via satellite, the ordinary viewers fell silent. Then, under their stunned gazes, the level 4 spirit beam, whose range, power, and duration had all greatly increased, instantly swept across the base. Boom. The entire military base was split in two. Ignoring the people in the base, Syd continued to control the spirit beam, which stretched over 100 meters long, carving into the ground. In an instant, deep cuts appeared on the ground. Meanwhile, attacks from the military base arrived. Bullets, rockets, and other projectiles bombarded him. However, the scene that unfolded only filled everyone with despair. Bang bang bang. Boom boom boom. No matter the attack, all were blocked by the reflective shield, without even making a splash. The people in the base were furious and terrified. They wanted to kill Messiah, but the sight before them only made them feel suffocated. It was only now that they truly realized just how terrifying Messiah was and the immense pressure he exerted on them. Watching live broadcasts and attacking with missiles from afar, they ultimately lacked the sense of facing him directly. Now, seeing Messiah unmoving as he withstood countless attacks. Monster, he's a real monster. Why would such a person be born in this world? Help, I don't want to die. The people in the base, all of them, wore expressions of fear. Yet, facing their pleas and desperate cries, Syd remained emotionally unaffected, still controlling the spirit beam. Boom boom boom. Cuts appeared on the ground, accompanied by terrified screams. Spirit Beam Experience +1. When the spirit beam could no longer be maintained, Syd would cast it again. In just a few moments, under his relentless attacks, the massive military base was reduced to rubble. Explosions and fires erupted in several areas. Soon, there wasn't a single survivor left in the base. After surveying the destroyed base one last time, Syd left without looking back, flying toward the nearest city. As for the officer he was holding, Syd simply eliminated him. In the sky, a satellite captured the horrifying scene clearly. At this moment, countless people fell into fear and silence. Compared to the base that was engulfed by light and vanished in an instant, this overwhelming, slowly destructive scene made them even more terrified. The military base's futile struggle, Messiah's despair-inducing power, were all vividly displayed before them. A secret military base. Arrogant, absolutely arrogant. Damn Omega Mutant. You will pay the price one day. Watching their comrades die, dozens of officers and several generals in the base were filled with fury. But, for now, they were powerless. As for dealing with Messiah, it would have to be addressed later. On the live broadcast, Irina, wearing a beautiful dress, was dumbfounded as she watched Messiah fly into the city and then disappear into a secluded corner. At this moment, the satellite had lost track of him. However, there wasn't time for her to think too much, as Messiah's disappearance led the viewers to turn their anger on her. Irina, is this the good news you promised us, with all that teasing? Heh. Disappear from my sight, you liar. Every time Irina said she had good news, the outcome was always beyond expectations, and this had directly enraged the viewers. On the broadcast stage, seeing the messages from viewers, Irina's face was full of frustration and panic. Meanwhile, Magneto and others also had mixed emotions. X-Mansion. Logan, Charles turned to his side. Professor? What's up? Logan looked puzzled, not understanding why Charles suddenly called him. In the next second, Professor X gave the answer. Logan, I need you to go to the city where Messiah was last seen. Try to find him before he completely vanishes. Logan understood, then nodded. He had heard about this from the professor earlier, but because of Messiah's situation, he hadn't taken action yet. Soon, he, Cyclops, and Storm boarded the black X-Jet. With a roar, the X-Jet disappeared into the sky. Hopefully, it goes smoothly. Charles sighed. As the X-Men took action, in the city where Messiah had last disappeared, the sunlight poured down, and Syd, having eluded satellite surveillance, was standing under the sun, continuously absorbing sunlight to replenish his depleted energy. At this moment, he sighed. Too bad, only 2 bases destroyed. Feeling regretful, his attention turned to his own power. End of chapter. Chapter 231, Chapter 231. The battle just now proved that my strength still wasn't enough, otherwise, I wouldn't have been so bothered by those missiles. For example, if my speed were 10 times the speed of sound instead of 7, I would have been confident in easily destroying that base, and the missiles wouldn't have affected me, avoiding such an embarrassing situation. Furthermore, it's obvious that next time the military's weapons will be even more advanced and harder to deal with. If I don't improve my abilities, facing them with my current strength could lead to trouble. While thinking about this, Syd absorbed more photon energy, turning his attention to the panel in front of him. Unlock progress, 74%. At 75% or 80%, I should be able to awaken the next ability. He thought, glancing at his recently depleted energy points with a sense of regret. Currently, the sunlight wasn't even enough to fully replenish his photon energy, let alone gather more energy points. Time passed quickly, and soon the sun began to set. A new day arrived with the morning sun shining down. By this time, Syd's photon energy had fully recovered. Just as he was about to pause his other ability training to collect some energy points and push Baldur's unlock progress to 75%, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps in the quiet alley. Syd frowned slightly. Seeing this, he prepared to go invisible and leave the area. But just as he was about to activate his invisibility, a familiar voice made him pause. Logan. He heard a conversation not far away. Cyclops, did you find him yet? No. Listening to the conversation, Syd had a hunch. Are they looking for me? Syd pondered for a moment, hesitating. After a brief moment of indecision, he decided to stop activating his invisibility and see if Wolverine had something important to say. After all, it had been a long time since he last saw Logan, ever since that experimental base sent people after him. With that in mind, he took a step toward the source of the voices. On the other side, Logan looked frustrated, listening to Cyclops and Storm over his headset, both reporting they hadn't found the Messiah. They had spent all afternoon and night searching every corner of the city, but still hadn't found any trace of the Messiah. He couldn't help but wonder if the Messiah had already left the city. Thinking about it, Logan's face turned solemn. The situation for mutants had been getting worse lately, with the Sentinels relentlessly hunting them. He couldn't shake the feeling of powerlessness. Other than the Messiah and the White Knight, no one could stop the Sentinels. As Logan pondered this, he sighed deeply. He was almost convinced that the Messiah had truly left the city. Otherwise, How could they have searched the entire place without finding him? Logan's expression grew even more downcast. But just as he was about to accept this reality, footsteps suddenly echoed from a dark corner nearby. Logan immediately tensed up and instinctively turned his head. The next second, his eyes widened in disbelief. Out from the shadows walked a young man dressed in black, carrying a black backpack. Since Syd was showing his face this time, Logan could clearly see the changes. For a moment, Logan was dazed, almost thinking he was looking at a god. The young man's face was strikingly handsome, flawless to the point of not seeming human. If not for the familiar hints in his face, Logan might have thought he had the wrong person. This was the Messiah. How had he changed so much? Noticing the surprise in Logan's eyes, Syd wasn't surprised. After the transformation of his divine body, divine power of light, and divinity, his appearance had indeed changed significantly, growing more handsome, almost approaching that of a god. There was even an aura about him that made people reluctant to look directly at him. Messiah. Syd, is that you? Logan hesitated. Syd nodded and asked, what's going on? He had some guesses but wanted to confirm. Before Logan could respond, a voice came through his headset. Logan, what's happening? Did you find the Messiah? Storm and Cyclops anxiously asked through Logan's headset. Yes, I found the Messiah. As soon as he said that, both Storm and Cyclops were in disbelief and shock. They had actually found him. They quickly asked for Logan's location and hurried over. Soon, Storm and Cyclops arrived at the secluded alley one after another. It was really the Messiah. Looking at the boy standing quietly in the distance, his appearance almost divine, both Storm and Cyclops were filled with joy and astonishment. At the same time, they felt a bit at a loss, unsure how to approach the terrifying Omega-level mutant before them. Especially Cyclops, whose feelings were incredibly conflicted. On one hand, they needed the Messiah's help, but on the other, it was suspected that this boy had killed Jean. In this situation, Cyclops' emotions were naturally all over the place. With no one speaking, an awkward silence filled the air. Finally, Syd broke the silence. Tell me, why are you looking for me? Hearing his question, the three of them finally calmed down. Syd. Logan began to explain. It didn't take long for Syd to understand the situation. Sentinels, huh? He frowned. He knew all about those machines hunting mutants. Not long ago, he had scoured a whole city for Sentinels and destroyed every single one of them. As a result, no more Sentinels dared to enter that city, and it became one of the safest places for mutants. Faced with Logan's plea for help, Syd hesitated, thinking it over. He didn't mind destroying more Sentinels, as it would certainly cause trouble for those responsible. Moreover, Logan and the others knew the locations of some military bases. After a moment of thought, he nodded. Seeing the Messiah agree, Storm and the others were overjoyed. They quickly relayed the news to Professor X, who was both shocked and puzzled. An Omega-level mutant. What kind of person was this Messiah? Mystery always seemed to surround him. Not just Professor X, but the rest of the mutants at the X Mansion, including Beast, were equally perplexed. End of chapter. Chapter 232, Chapter 232. There was much confusion in the hearts of Professor X and the others when it came to the Messiah. Although they often saw him through satellite footage, they had never interacted with him up close, leaving them full of questions about him. Under these circumstances, this was their first meeting. At the X Mansion. Professor X, Hank, Beast, and some students, including Iceman and Shadowcat, were waiting at the mansion's landing strip. Buzz. A black jet quickly flew in and landed slowly on the strip as they watched expectantly. As the ramp descended, everyone saw a group walking down. Professor X, Iceman, and the others glanced past Logan and the others, who were dressed in black X suits, and fixed their eyes on the last figure. This person was wearing black, his face stunningly handsome, flawless, and far from human, too perfect to gaze at directly. A strange aura surrounded him. Anyone who looked at him felt an intense pressure and a sense of suffocation. This was the Messiah. The students, including Iceman, were dazed, their expressions quickly turning to fear. Messiah's appearance far exceeded what they had imagined, causing a deep sense of intimidation. Before the Messiah's arrival, they had thought about asking him questions, like how he was so powerful and about his Omega-level abilities, but now Shadowcat, Iceman, and the others no longer dared to approach him. Beast, Hank, and Professor X were staring in awe at the slowly approaching Messiah. This is an Omega-level mutant. No wonder he looks so extraordinary, Hank thought to himself. As the young man drew closer, Professor X couldn't suppress his curiosity and instinctively used his psychic powers to probe the Messiah's mind. Normally, this wasn't something he did often. In fact, under normal circumstances, he wouldn't casually invade someone's mind. But Messiah was too special, not only as an Omega-level mutant but also with terrifying power. If he were ever to lose control, the consequences would be catastrophic. The recent events all proved how dangerous Messiah was. Professor X even suspected that the speed at which Messiah moved, 7 times the speed of sound, and the destruction of a 2-kilometer radius, wasn't even his full strength. Just like some others, Professor X also believed Messiah was hiding his true power. If that were the case, it would be terrifying. On top of that, his natural curiosity about Messiah compelled him to use his psychic powers to probe further. In the next second, without anyone else noticing, a powerful wave of psychic energy spread toward Syd. But instantly, Syd detected it, realizing Professor X was trying to invade his mind. Without thinking, Syd's immense mental power surged forth, blocking and shielding himself from the intrusion. In the next moment, Syd turned his gaze toward the bald man in the suit sitting in the wheelchair, Professor X. The two locked eyes in the air, one with a calm expression, the other with a look of astonishment. "Messiah, you..." Professor X muttered in shock. "Professor, what's going on?" Cyclops and the others turned their gaze toward him. Soon, they realized that Messiah and Professor X were locked in a silent exchange. Cyclops and the others immediately began to speculate. Could it be? Sure enough, in the next moment, Professor X mumbled in disbelief, "It's unimaginable. Your mental power is just as incredibly strong." "What? Professor?" Cyclops and the others were bewildered, and curiosity filled their hearts. "Is Syd's mental power also that strong?" Logan asked in surprise. Everyone saw Professor X nod, his face filled with confusion and disbelief. Professor X couldn't understand how Messiah's destructive powers were already terrifying enough, yet his mental powers were just as formidable. During the Apocalypse incident, Professor X had faintly sensed it, but now, after personally experiencing it, he was still left in disbelief, thinking it impossible. In his perception, Messiah's mental power wasn't weaker than his own. In fact, he vaguely sensed a terrifying energy hidden within Messiah's body, an energy that filled him with dread. Just imagining that energy being unleashed sent shivers down his spine. "He's even scarier than Jean," Professor X thought grimly. If Jean lost control, there might still be ways to stop her. But if this boy lost control completely? Recalling the scene of the city's destruction, Professor X shuddered again. Let's hope that day never comes. As he thought this, Professor X explained briefly to Logan and the others. Messiah's mental power isn't weaker than the Professor's. No way. Oh my. Shadowcat, Iceman, Logan, Cyclops, and the others were utterly shocked, unable to believe what they were hearing as they turned to look at Messiah. They could hardly believe their ears. An Omega-level mutant. Was he really this powerful and terrifying? So this was an Omega-level mutant. Shadowcat and Iceman were both stunned, filled with both envy and fear, their minds overwhelmed with awe. Syd, however, paid no mind to their stares and instead frowned slightly at the professor. He wasn't surprised by the professor's actions. Normally, this man wouldn't spy on others, but in Syd's case, it was different. Anyone in his position would have been tempted to take a peek. This was also why he had waited until now to meet Professor X. Only with his current immense mental power did Syd feel confident in facing any psychic ability user. At the same time, he wasn't fully convinced by Professor X's image of a kind, benevolent leader. If the professor didn't play by the rules and used his powers to manipulate others, the situation for mutants wouldn't be what it is today. Of course, Syd also understood some of the reasons behind the professor's personality. Apart from being born into a wealthy family, which shaped his worldview differently from Magneto's, long ago, Professor X had realized the terrifying nature of his psychic power. To prevent himself from becoming evil, he had made a precautionary measure. He had partitioned a section of his consciousness to absorb any negative thoughts and dark impulses. This self-imposed measure was why he always maintained a peaceful, enlightened state. End of chapter. Chapter 233, Chapter 233. 1500 PS reached. Thanks for your support. This kind of behavior was typical for him. Professor X had once built a mental cage deep within Jean Grey's mind, trying to lock away the destructive personality of the Dark Phoenix. Unfortunately, none of the mental cages Professor X created lasted indefinitely, including the one he set up for himself. Syd remembered that in the future, during one incident where Magneto enraged Professor X, an angry Charles forcibly invaded Magneto's consciousness. In doing so, the seal suppressing his own negative thoughts was shattered. The fusion of both his and Magneto's negative consciousness gave birth to a powerful entity. An entity known as Onslaught. Onslaught wiped out numerous superheroes, and if it hadn't been for Franklin, a mutant who revived them, countless lives would have been lost. After thinking about it for a moment, Syd refocused his attention on Professor X. Standing nearby was his old acquaintance, Chris, burly, rugged, and with a somewhat weathered yet handsome face, resembling a middle-aged man. He looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated. Before he could speak, Syd looked at Professor X and said, "Where are those Sentinel robots? Take me to them." Logan and the others looked at Syd in surprise. He was ready to confront the Sentinels already. Without any preparation. They were just about to express concern but then remembered that this was the Messiah standing before them. If the Messiah couldn't handle the Sentinel robots, then no one could. Cyclops, Scott, responded seriously, "Messiah, I'll take you there." "I'm coming too," Storm, Aurora, added. Hearing this, Logan also expressed his desire to go. Scott turned to the rest with concern, "No, the Sentinels are too dangerous. I'll go with the Messiah alone, if something happens." Before he could finish, Logan interrupted, "Cyclops, stop fussing. I said I'm going, so I'm going." Storm nodded in agreement. Seeing he couldn't convince them otherwise, Scott finally relented, and the three of them agreed to go together. Soon, they exited the X-Mansion and got into a black car, heading towards the area where the Sentinels had been frequently spotted. "I hope everything goes well," Professor X muttered worriedly as he watched the black car drive away. Hank, Beast, standing beside him, reassured him, "Don't worry, Professor. With Messiah there, everything will be fine." Charles knew this, but the terrifying nature of the Sentinel robots kept him from shaking off his anxiety. While they were talking, neither noticed that Iceman, Shadowcat, and a few other students had disappeared. At that moment, Iceman and the others had gotten into a car, following the direction where Syd and the group had gone. "Bobby, isn't this a bad idea?" Shadowcat, Kitty, said with a worried expression. Clearly, she didn't approve of following Logan and the others. "What's there to be afraid of? We're not going to fight, we're just watching from a distance," said Ludwin, a young mutant, excitedly. "Bobby," Iceman agreed, "he's right, Kitty. We're just going to watch from a distance. Don't you want to see the fight? Aren't you curious?" Hearing this, Shadowcat hesitated, but in the end, her curiosity got the better of her, and she went along with the plan. With one car in front and one behind. After more than half an hour, the group arrived at the location where the Sentinel robots had been sighted. Syd stepped out of the car, scanning the vast, desolate area. There were no Sentinels in sight. He turned to Logan and the others, about to ask them something, when suddenly, he heard a noise in the distance. A booming sound echoed from afar. Syd looked in the direction of the noise and began walking toward it. Behind him, Storm, Logan, and Cyclops were puzzled. "Syd, where are you going?" Logan called out. Getting no response, the three of them, both confused and helpless, followed him. After a moment, Logan's expression changed, he seemed to have heard something. "What's wrong, Logan?" Before Storm could ask, she too heard the noise, and her gaze shifted toward the direction ahead. As the four of them rounded a corner, they were met with a horrifying scene. In the distance, three tall, slender, pitch-black Sentinel robots were relentlessly attacking a building. Boom. A laser beam shot out, blowing a large hole in the building. Sentinel robots. Logan and the others heard faint screams coming from inside the building. At the same time, they saw the Sentinel on the far right holding a young man, who appeared to be unconscious, in its grasp. The man had a collar around his neck, a mutant power inhibitor. Logan, Storm, and Cyclops were on high alert, focused on the Sentinel robots. They couldn't help but feel astonished by how accurately Messiah had predicted this encounter. Had Messiah known all along? As they continued to watch the Sentinels in the distance, the three of them were unsure how to proceed or how to resolve the situation. Without paying attention to Logan and the others' hesitation, Syd stepped forward. Syd. Logan and the others were stunned. Before he had taken many steps, the Sentinel robots seemed to sense something and stopped their attacks, all turning their heads in unison to look at him. It was as if a specific setting had been triggered. They focused solely on Syd, completely ignoring the 4 mutants inside the building. Even Logan and the others further away were ignored by the Sentinels. Clearly, in their programming, Messiah was their primary target for elimination. Inside the building, Wellington and the others were trembling in fear. Sentinel robots. 3 monsters. What do we do? Are we going to die? They waited in despair for judgment to descend. Suddenly, they realized the Sentinels had stopped attacking. Confused, they cautiously peeked outside, only to witness something astonishing. The 3 black Sentinel robots were staring intently into the distance. Not only had they stopped attacking, but they seemed unusually cautious, not making any moves at all. What's going on? What's happening? In their bewilderment, they followed the Sentinels' gaze and saw something that puzzled them further. In the distance, at the end of their line of sight, they could vaguely make out a mysterious figure dressed in black, standing there, seemingly staring down the Sentinels. What's going on? Wellington and the others were filled with confusion. What were the Sentinels doing, staring at this person? Why weren't they attacking? This behavior was completely contrary to everything they knew about Sentinels. Weren't Sentinels supposed to be ruthless, violent, and quick to attack at the slightest provocation? This strange stillness defied everything they understood. End of chapter. Chapter 234, Chapter 234. Are the Sentinel robots malfunctioning or something? Why are they just staring at a man in black without making any moves, as if they're not planning to attack first? This strange and eerie scene left Wellington and his group both bewildered and confused. What was happening? While they were lost in thought, an alarm suddenly blared inside a nearby experimental base. The sound immediately caught the attention of the workers monitoring the Sentinels. An alert has been triggered. What's going on? In front of several surveillance screens sat 2 men dressed in blue uniforms. These men were responsible for overseeing the Sentinel robots, each of which had surveillance cameras installed to transmit real-time footage back to them. They continuously scanned the surveillance screens, and if they noticed anything unusual, they would immediately report it to their superiors. However, sometimes they would miss certain anomalies because it was impossible to monitor all the screens at once. For this reason, the Sentinels were programmed to trigger an alert if something serious happened, like damage to the robots. Upon hearing the alarm, their first thought was that one of the Sentinels had encountered an issue or even been destroyed. With this in mind, Sheriff, a tall, thin, balding middle-aged man, looked surprised and remarked, "Has another powerful mutant appeared?" The other man, a young man in his 20s named Klaus, looked shocked and asked, "Is that mutant really strong enough to destroy a Sentinel robot?" Since the start of the operation to capture mutants, they had only heard this alarm a few times. And now, another one had gone off. Was this new mutant really that powerful? The two were filled with both surprise and confusion. Thinking about it, they immediately searched for the surveillance feed that had triggered the alarm. Just as they were curious about what the powerful mutant looked like, their expressions suddenly froze, their eyes widening in horror. On the screen appeared a mysterious figure dressed in black. At first, they thought it was just another strong mutant, but after taking a closer look, they couldn't hide their fear. This mysterious figure was all too familiar to them, familiar enough to leave a psychological shadow. Me Messiah. Am I seeing things? How could it be him? Sheriff and Klaus were filled with disbelief. Messiah was different from other mutants. If it were any other mutant, even those strong enough to destroy individual Sentinels, they would remain unfazed and even evaluate the situation calmly. They had seen so many mutants that they had grown used to looking down on them with a sense of superiority, whether they were ordinary or powerful enough to destroy Sentinels. But upon seeing Messiah, that sense of superiority and arrogance vanished instantly, replaced by shock and terror. An Omega-level mutant. Shocked and terrified, they quickly notified their superiors. Soon, Alessandro and Dr. Bolivar were alerted and rushed over. Messiah has been spotted. Where is he? Following Sheriff's prompt, Base Commander Alessandro and Dr. Bolivar quickly looked at the surveillance footage of Messiah. It really was Messiah. In an instant, both men felt a sense of dread. How long has this standoff been going on? Alessandro asked, staring at the monitor. Sheriff hesitated, asking, "Sir, are you asking how long the standoff has lasted?" Alessandro nodded. Thinking for a moment, Sheriff replied, "About 2 or 3 minutes, I think." Upon hearing this, Alessandro and Dr. Bolivar, who had been filled with dread, suddenly had their eyes light up. If they had been wary of Messiah before and thought the 3 Sentinel robots were doomed, now they felt a surge of anticipation. According to the Sentinel's programming, when encountering Omega-level mutants like Messiah or the White Knight, in addition to triggering alerts, the robots would also enter a defensive mode, adopting a delaying tactic. As long as the Omega-level mutants didn't attack first, the Sentinels wouldn't initiate combat either. Instead, they would use the time to fully replicate the Omega-level abilities. If the Sentinels had enough time to copy Omega-level powers, then even Messiah and the White Knight would fall. It seems Messiah's arrogance has gotten the better of him. He didn't learn from his previous encounter, so let's show him the power of the Sentinels this time. Alessandro and Dr. Bolivar sneered, recalling the time when a fake Messiah had appeared and the Sentinels had successfully copied his abilities. At that moment, they could almost picture Messiah being defeated and killed by his own powers. While Alessandro, Sheriff, and the others looked on with anticipation, the scene at the location was quite different. Syd, looking at the 3 Sentinel robots in the distance, raised an eyebrow. The reason he hadn't attacked yet was to test a theory. After waiting for some time and seeing that the Sentinels still hadn't replicated anything, Syd quickly grew impatient. The next second, he continued walking toward the Sentinels. At the same time, a car pulled up in the distance, and Iceman, along with the other mutant students, stepped out. As soon as they arrived, they saw Messiah walking toward the Sentinel robots. Seeing this, Shadowcat, Iceman, and the other mutant students all felt a sense of tension. Would Messiah be able to win? Even though the Omega-level mutant Messiah was incredibly strong in their minds, the fear the Sentinels instilled in them was still overwhelming. No one wasn't afraid of them. On the other side, Logan, Storm, and Cyclops shared similar concerns. At that moment, as Syd approached, the 3 Sentinel robots finally reacted. In an instant, one of the Sentinel's black bodies shifted, transforming into a fiery red, as if it were made of molten lava. The next second, a thick column of fire shot out, rushing toward Syd. At the same time, another Sentinel's body began to crystallize, and a layer of crystal appeared on Syd's body. It was clear this was the ability of a mutant with crystallization powers. End of chapter. Chapter 235, Chapter 235. Meanwhile, another Sentinel robot vanished from its original spot in an instant, reappearing behind Syd, its right hand forming into a sharp spike, ready to pierce his back. For a moment, Syd's body was immobilized by the crystal, with a pillar of fire in front of him and a Sentinel attacking from behind. In an instant, the coordinated attack of the Sentinels was astonishingly seamless, making it seem as though Syd was about to meet his end. From a distance, Wellington and his group, who had been confused just moments earlier, now looked on in horror, feeling a deep sense of dread. Was yet another comrade going to die? At the same time, Logan and the others were startled, while Iceman and the students turned pale. At the experimental base, Alessandro and Dr. Bolivar felt a jolt of disbelief. Could Messiah be caught off guard and die from this sneak attack? With the 2 men watching eagerly, as well as the eyes of Logan and the others. Rebound shield experience +1. Rebound shield experience +1. Both the incoming pillar of fire and the spike aimed at Syd's back were blocked, halting just outside his body. To the outside observer, it looked as though Syd hadn't even moved, yet he had stopped both attacks. At the same moment, a radiant light emanated from his body. Under the glow, the crystal binding him dissolved like water, as though it had never existed. Syd continued walking without pause. As he walked, blue light began to form in his right hand. Spirit light column experience +1. With a loud boom, a massive blue light column over 100 meters long appeared, and in the next instant, it slashed down from the sky, striking the lava-like Sentinel robot. At that moment, whether it was Logan and his group, Iceman and the others, or the survivors, Wellington's group, they were all left stunned. Watching a live broadcast was entirely different from seeing it in real life. In the wide-angle view of a satellite, everything seemed so small. Messiah had used this blue light beam before, but when they had seen it back then, it hadn't seemed so overwhelming. Now, looking at the massive blue beam that extended over 100 meters, crashing down with terrifying momentum, everyone was left speechless. Under the blue beam, the Sentinel robot looked pitifully small. Boom. In the blink of an eye, the beam slashed through the Sentinel robot's body. Rip. The lava-like Sentinel was instantly sliced in half. In the blink of an eye, that Sentinel robot was scrapped. In the next second, Syd calmly shifted his gaze toward the crystal-wielding Sentinel. With a slight movement of his right hand, the still-present spirit light beam slashed through the second Sentinel. Whoosh! Under the stunned gaze of Logan and the others, the robot, which seemed to be made of water, was instantly cut into several pieces. Finally, Syd turned his attention to the last remaining Sentinel. At that moment, the Sentinel appeared to sense danger and began rapidly transforming into a silver form. Both Syd and Logan's group recognized this form. It was the Colossus mode. In this form, the Sentinel's body would be incredibly tough, second only to adamantium. As Logan and the others watched, Messiah simply raised his right hand and extended his index finger. The next second, the sound of shattering glass filled the air. Crack, crack, boom. The sound of glass breaking was followed by a terrifying shockwave. Boom. Syd's expression remained calm. In the blink of an eye, the Sentinel that had been standing before him was sent flying backward with tremendous force. Simultaneously, shards of transparent, shattered glass spread at incredible speed. Under the dazed gazes of Logan and the others, the shards of broken glass sliced through the Sentinel's steel body. As the Sentinel flew backward, its body was cut into pieces midair. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of metal fragments hitting the ground echoed. In an instant, the scene fell silent. Logan and the others stared blankly at the sight before them. The Sentinels, which they had considered incredibly difficult to deal with, were now nothing more than piles of scrap metal in the blink of an eye. They had thought Messiah would use his Omega abilities to wipe out the Sentinels. But instead, he didn't even use his Omega abilities. With just a few casual movements, he blocked several attacks and then calmly eliminated 2 of the Sentinels. With another casual movement, he lightly pointed his right hand, and the last terrifying Sentinel was shattered in an instant. At this moment, Logan and the others were left in a daze, staring blankly at the remains of the Sentinels scattered around them, then back at Messiah. They had imagined the gap between Messiah and the Sentinels, they had even thought about the battle between the two, but none of them had anticipated what had just happened. The gap between them was this massive. This wasn't just an overwhelming victory, it was like casually crushing 3 ants. What they would need to pay a huge price to accomplish, Messiah had done effortlessly. At this moment, Iceman and the others looked at Messiah as if they were looking at a monster. While Logan and the others were stunned, back at the experimental base, Alessandro, Dr. Bolivar, and Sheriff were equally in shock. This kind of power. Commander Alessandro, Dr. Bolivar, and Sheriff were all deeply shaken. Had Messiah's power really become this terrifying? And this was without even using his Omega-level mutant abilities. It was only by comparing him to the Sentinels that they truly realized the extent of Messiah's current strength. But there was something else that left Alessandro and Dr. Bolivar utterly dumbfounded. After all this time, the Sentinels still hadn't managed to copy any of Messiah's abilities. Even if they could only copy abilities for a short time before they became ineffective, copying was still copying. Yet now, they hadn't even been able to do that. What was going on? They were in disbelief. Of course, they didn't know that Syd's genes had become far too complex for the Sentinels to replicate in a short amount of time. Still, even though the Sentinels couldn't copy his powers, their own inherent abilities were still troublesome. If they came in large numbers, wave after wave, they could still cause problems for him. While Commander Alessandro and Dr. Bolivar were left in shock, the 4 survivors, Wellington and his group, stared blankly at the mysterious man in black. Seeing his familiar abilities and the way he effortlessly dispatched the Sentinels, Wellington and his group were deeply shaken and finally recognized who he was. End of chapter. Chapter 236, Chapter 236. Wellington and his group finally understood why the Sentinels were staring at the mysterious figure and didn't dare to attack earlier. It wasn't a malfunction after all. At that moment, Wellington and his group were completely shocked. It's Messiah. Looking at the distant figure of the mysterious young man in black, they couldn't believe it. Messiah had appeared here. No wonder the Sentinels had behaved so strangely. In addition to this, they were equally stunned by Messiah's power. The three Sentinels, which had nearly killed them and left them powerless, were equally helpless in the face of Messiah. It was as if he was casually strolling through the park, effortlessly squashing 3 bugs. For a while, the 4 were filled with awe. Only when they saw Messiah turning to leave did they dare to step forward. They hurried over and lifted their unconscious companion, who had been struck by the Sentinels and had the mutant power inhibitor collar placed on him. During the battle, Syd had deliberately avoided attacking him, or the 4 of them would have been left with nothing but a corpse. Wally, wake up. Wellington shook his unconscious friend. Ugh. Soon, the young man named Wally woke up. Where am I? Did you guys get caught too? Wally asked in horror. Wellington and the other 3 shook their heads. No, we were saved. What? Wally was stunned, not understanding what had happened. Saved? From those powerful Sentinels? For a moment, Wally found it hard to believe. It was Messiah. He saved us. Graf pointed to the distant figure. Wally instinctively turned his head and saw the mysterious figure in black walking away. Messiah. Wally muttered in shock. At this point, Wellington and the others excitedly started talking. Wally, you have no idea how incredible Messiah is. He wiped out those 3 Sentinels in the blink of an eye. Wally was left speechless. In the blink of an eye. That's an exaggeration, right? As he listened to their recounting of the events and looked at the distant figure, Wally's heart was filled with admiration, awe, and a deep sense of reverence. While they were discussing, Syd had already approached Logan and the others. Before they could say anything, Syd spoke first. Dealing with them one by one is too slow. I'll go handle this myself. With that, his body lifted off the ground, and under the astonished gazes of Logan and the others, he flew into the distance. Watching Messiah's figure disappear, Logan and the others opened their mouths but could only smile bitterly in the end. Indeed, if Messiah worked alone, he could probably clear out the Sentinels much faster without them slowing him down. Recalling what they had just witnessed, they couldn't help but feel a mixture of helplessness, amazement, and even a bit of frustration. They were all mutants, yet the gap between them and Messiah was this vast. While Logan and the others were feeling disheartened, Iceman and the other students, who had been secretly observing, were excitedly discussing what had just happened, exclaiming in awe. As everyone's emotions fluctuated, Syd had flown several kilometers away, skillfully scanning the area below. Swoosh. Syd increased his speed to 7 times the speed of sound, quickly flying over the city. In no time, the sound of wind roared through the city. People walking on the streets or eating heard the noise. Some were puzzled, while others caught a glimpse of a figure flashing across the sky. Who was that? Is someone flying? Wait, could that have been Messiah? Some thought the fleeting shadow looked familiar and were left in shock. Before long, they got their answer. Every time Syd spotted a Sentinel robot, he stopped briefly to destroy it, then took off again, leaving behind a sonic boom. Although he didn't linger long, it was enough for those paying attention to recognize who he was and even capture footage of him. As Messiah destroyed more and more Sentinels, more people became aware of his actions. Ordinary people were terrified, while mutants were thrilled and grateful. Soon, this story made the headlines. Once again, Messiah's figure appeared before the public. Seeing Messiah destroy Sentinel robots with ease, countless people were left in shock and fear. At the experimental base. Damn that Messiah. My Sentinels. Commander Alessandro gritted his teeth, while Dr. Bolivar was heartbroken. Messiah, your arrogance won't last long. Commander Alessandro seethed with hatred. Over time, the base had accumulated over 1,000 Sentinels. If they deployed them all at once in waves, avoiding being wiped out in one go by Messiah. In that scenario, they didn't believe Messiah would be unscathed. Furthermore, the longer they delayed, the more Sentinels they could amass, increasing the likelihood of Messiah's defeat. In a little while, when we have more Sentinels. Commander Alessandro sneered. As for now, he would let Messiah enjoy his brief moment of triumph. With that in mind, he immediately ordered all Sentinels in the city to withdraw. Swoosh. Syd was speeding through the air. Soon, he noticed the strange movements of the Sentinels. Were they retreating? In the next second, he caught up with several Sentinels, his hands glowing blue. Spirit Light Column Experience +1. Boom, one by one, the Sentinels were destroyed. Then, with a flash, he flew around the outskirts of the city. Sentinels attempting to retreat were quickly caught and wiped out in an instant. The more Syd cleared them out, the better he felt. Although these Sentinels were no real threat, it was still satisfying to mess with those responsible. Indeed, back at the mysterious base, Commander Alessandro and Dr. Bolivar were seething with rage, wishing they could tear him apart. If looks could kill, Syd would have died countless times by now. But, in the face of Syd's power, without proper preparation, they could do nothing but seethe in impotent rage. Soon, aside from a few Sentinels that had hidden or managed to slip away unnoticed, most of the Sentinels in the city had been wiped out. The entire process took less than an hour. With the job done, Syd flew back toward where Logan and the others were waiting. Before long, he arrived and saw Logan, Storm, and Cyclops talking with Iceman and the rescued mutants. End of chapter. Chapter 237, Chapter 237. 500 PS reached. I think, next goal, 1000. As the sound of a sonic boom echoed, Logan and the others instinctively stopped talking and turned to look. The scene quieted down. Looking at the figure floating in the sky, silhouetted against the sunlight, even though they knew he was an ally, Logan and the others couldn't help but feel pressure. Before they could ask anything, Syd spoke first. The Sentinel robots in this city have been cleared. There might be a few hiding, but there shouldn't be many left. So quickly. In less than an hour, dozens of Sentinels had been wiped out. Logan and the others stared blankly at the figure in the sky, thinking of him as a god. Syd then thought for a moment before continuing, I heard you know the locations of several military bases. Tell me where they are. Cyclops hesitated briefly, but in the end, he gave the locations to Messiah. Whatever happens after that isn't his concern, he doesn't like the military much anyway. Though he wondered if the professor might have something to say about it later. As these thoughts passed through Scott's mind, he shared all the information he knew, even pulling out a map from his pocket, which showed he had been prepared for this. Syd floated down, took the map, and glanced at the 5 marked locations. I'll be going now. With the map in hand, Syd didn't stay long. His body lifted off again. Boom. The sonic boom resounded. Blocking the gust of wind that followed, Logan and the others hesitated but could only watch as Messiah disappeared from view. Noticing Iceman and the others looking dejected, Logan offered some comfort, don't worry, we'll meet Messiah again someday. With that, they set off together, heading back to the X mansion. At the entrance to the mansion, Professor X, who had been waiting for some time, smiled when he saw them return. However, upon realizing Messiah had left, he sighed. For some reason, he felt a deep fondness for Messiah. Even when Messiah did things like destroy a city, he instinctively chose to look the other way. Originally, he had wanted to talk to Messiah, hoping to guide him and prevent him from losing control. But now, it seemed like there was no opportunity. I just hope there will never be a day when Messiah loses control. Professor X murmured with a sigh. While Professor X was deep in thought, Syd was sitting on top of a skyscraper, absorbing photon energy as he studied the map in his hand. Soon, he selected the 2 military bases closest to his location. As for the other 3, he decided to ignore them for now to avoid giving the military time to prepare an ambush. With that in mind, Syd entered a secluded area, activated his invisibility, and in the next second, flew towards one of the military bases marked on the map. In less than 10 minutes, he arrived at the location. He deactivated his invisibility and hovered tens of meters above the ground, looking down at the somber military base below with a faint smile. Blue light gathered in his hand as he prepared to unleash his spirit light column. But suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. That's right, the energy in the void space of my rebound shield has accumulated quite a bit. He remembered all the energy he had absorbed from missiles during past battles. Perfect, I can save some photon energy and collect more energy points. Thinking about the 74% unlock progress of Baldur's ability, Syd paused before releasing his spirit light column. He focused on the energy stored within the void space of his rebound shield, and the next second, he began to draw it out. Inside the military base, some officers were working while others chatted idly. That damn Messiah, he's so arrogant, acting like we don't even matter. When we get the chance, I'll show him who's boss. As they watched the news of Messiah destroying the Sentinels, many officers grumbled angrily, some even laughing and mocking him. They joked around, not taking Messiah seriously at all. After all, what harm could come from talking like this? Messiah wouldn't know, and he couldn't touch them anyway. But just as they were thinking that, a strange sound echoed from the sky. One by one, the officers instinctively looked up. Their eyes widened in terror and shock. Above them, a massive explosion of fiery energy appeared in the sky. Boom. The energy stored in the rebound shield surged forth. What's happening? Why is there an explosion? No. In the terrified, disbelieving eyes of the officers, the explosion engulfed them. Boom, boom, boom. The deafening explosions rocked the area, sending the officers flying. Looking down at the vast area affected by the blast, Syd raised an eyebrow in surprise. But then he realized this outcome was normal. After all, he had been bombarded countless times, and the void space had absorbed a huge amount of energy. Whether it was explosive energy or kinetic force. Many of the missiles had detonated very close to him, and before they could fully explode, most of their energy had been absorbed by the rebound shield. All that energy had accumulated in the void space, and under his control, none of it had dissipated, leaving a massive reserve. The military base below wasn't particularly large, so the entire facility was instantly engulfed by the explosion, swallowing everything within it. The officers barely had time to feel fear before being consumed by the blast, perishing in despair. After scanning the base, now completely consumed by the explosion, Syd shook his head and flew toward the next base. As for the destroyed base, there was no chance anyone had survived. Even a minor earthquake can kill people, let alone an explosion like this. Syd didn't think the base had any high-level defense systems in place. Even if they did, the officers wouldn't have had time to reach them. Shortly after Syd left, the military learned of the incident. They quickly pulled up footage from the scene. Was that an explosion? What's going on? Staring at the footage of the explosion engulfing the entire base, numerous U.S. military officers were both shocked and confused, unable to understand what had happened to cause such devastation. A terrorist attack. As for Messiah, they didn't even consider him a possibility. After all, Messiah didn't have abilities like this. How could it have been him? While they were still puzzled, someone pulled up another piece of footage. The screen showed the blurry figure of a mysterious man in black. What is that? End of chapter. Chapter 238, Chapter 238. Even though the image was blurry, the mysterious man in black looked all too familiar to everyone present. Messiah. How is that possible? It's really him. Countless U.S. military officers were left shocked and in disbelief. That terrifying explosion was caused by Messiah. When did Messiah gain such a mutant ability? That explosion destroyed an entire military base. If Messiah had used his familiar mutant abilities, they might not have thought much of it. But this unfamiliar power. Had Messiah gotten stronger, or had he awakened new mutant abilities? That's impossible. How could something like this happen? He must have used some kind of trick. Voices of discussion filled the room. Maybe the footage is wrong. Perhaps it's not Messiah, just someone who looks like him. Just as someone suggested this, they suddenly received a distress signal from another base. As the screen switched to the other base, they saw the one person they didn't want to see. Floating above the base was the mysterious man in black, Messiah. At this moment, his hands were glowing with blue light. Under the horrified gazes of countless people, Messiah wielded a massive blue energy beam over 100 meters long, casually slicing through the military base as if it were a toy, showing no urgency or effort. No matter how the base's personnel retaliated, whether by launching missiles or anything else, Messiah remained unmoved, continuing to calmly cut through the base. The officers on site were clearly terrified, their faces full of dread. Soon, the entire base was reduced to rubble, with every officer perishing in despair. Watching this scene, the officers present shuddered. At the same time, they came to a realization. The person who destroyed the previous base was indeed Messiah. They were filled with disbelief. Alongside their terror, they were also burning with anger. Damn it! This Messiah had become more and more arrogant. If this continued, he'd be uncontrollable. Did he think they had no means of dealing with him? If pushed to the brink, they might as well drop a nuclear bomb on him and wipe him out. They refused to believe that anyone, even Messiah, could survive a nuclear explosion. Soon, an enraged general gave the order to take countermeasures. Each military base began setting traps, in one form or another. As long as Messiah dared to approach, at the moment he destroyed a base, the traps would be triggered. Some of the traps were powerful enough to destroy everything within a 10-kilometer radius. They didn't believe Messiah could survive that. Some bases were even empty, with not a single person inside. If Messiah got close, they'd detonate, burying him in the explosion. Unfortunately for them, just as they were fuming and eager for revenge, Syd seemed to sense something and halted his destruction of the military bases. It was getting dark in New York. In a shadowy corner, Syd deactivated his invisibility. Having destroyed 2 military bases, he had vented his anger and reached the current limits of what he could do. Now, he pondered what to do next. At that moment, the Venom symbiote, which had been quiet for a while, suddenly emerged from his hand. Seeing Venom's small head, Syd asked curiously, "What's going on?" Venom replied seriously, "Syd, something's not right. I can sense danger approaching. The longer time passes, the stronger this feeling becomes. There might be some kind of conspiracy targeting us." As Venom had spent more time bonding with Syd, it had grown stronger. Of course, there were costs to this strength. Venom had become dependent on Syd, much like humans need oxygen. Venom could survive apart from Syd for short periods, and it could still be powerful, but if separated for too long, it would be like a fish out of water, and its powers would falter, potentially leading to its death. However, Venom didn't care. Its growing power was intoxicating, making it eager for more. If anyone tried to separate them, Venom would be the first to fight back. Besides, staying with Syd had greatly enhanced Venom's danger sense. Right now, its instincts were screaming that a threat was drawing closer. And considering its current strength, which even Venom didn't fully understand, for it to feel danger was highly unusual. Clearly, this was no ordinary threat. It was something significant, possibly aimed directly at Syd. Otherwise, Venom wouldn't feel such an intense sense of impending danger. Hearing Venom's warning, Syd paused and thought. As time passed, danger was approaching. After a brief moment of reflection, he quickly pieced things together. It was probably the military scheming again. It seems I can't afford to slow down in getting stronger. Syd muttered to himself. Despite his current strength, it was still not enough. If he stopped growing stronger, he might fall into danger and be caught in others' schemes. With that thought, Syd's resolve hardened. Initially, he had been considering what to do after dealing with the military bases, whether to practice his abilities or gather energy points to continue unlocking Baldur's powers. Now, he realized he could do both while focusing on gathering something else. And what would offer the quickest, most significant increase in strength? The Infinity Stones, of course. If he could collect all 6, their combined power might elevate him to the cosmic level. Syd estimated that his current strength was close to that of a Skyfather. And beyond the Skyfather level was the cosmic tier, the level of power granted by the 6 Infinity Stones combined. Unfortunately, the Infinity Stones have been weakened for various reasons. Right now, they can only reach the cosmic level. While the stones were external objects, having them would give Syd additional protection until his true power grew further. As he thought about it, Syd couldn't help but recall the looming crisis and the hidden celestial inside Earth's core. Each of these threats posed a great danger, making the collection of the Infinity Stones all the more urgent. End of chapter. Chapter 239, Chapter 239. With this thought in mind, Syd pulled out a black backpack from behind him. As he opened the backpack, 3 separated compartments were revealed, each containing a glowing object. Inside were none other than the Tesseract, the Reality Stone, and the Mind Stone, which he had removed from the scepter. Since the scepter was too large, he had discarded the staff itself, keeping only the gemstone at the top. Of course, it was still encased, similar to the Tesseract. It turned out that with or without the staff, Syd could still use the Mind Stone after sensing its power. In the next moment, photon energy surged in his hand as he grabbed the Tesseract. Meanwhile, after some hesitation, Syd began to imagine the planet where the orb, the container of the Power Stone, was located. The orb was similar to the Tesseract, both containing Infinity Stones, only the orb held the Power Stone. He wondered if the Tesseract could take him to that planet. If it couldn't, his plan to collect the Infinity Stones would be stalled. After all, without reaching level 5 with his divine body, he currently lacked the ability to survive indefinitely in the vacuum of space. Meanwhile, in a distant, unfamiliar galaxy, there lay a desolate planet. Flashes of lightning occasionally flickered in the atmosphere, casting the planet in darkness, much like an overcast day on Earth. This planet was none other than Morag, an abandoned world. Amidst the howling winds and pouring rain, a figure dressed in a reddish-brown leather jacket, with a mask sporting glowing red eyes, appeared. If Syd were there, he would instantly recognize the figure, none other than Star-Lord from the Guardians of the Galaxy. If Iron Man was known as a mortal who stood among gods, then this man could be described as a god who stood among mortals. Star-Lord, whose full name was Peter Jason Quill, had a human mother and a celestial father, Ego the Living Planet, a celestial being. However, Ego was an incomplete celestial. He possessed celestial-level powers but lacked the physical form of a celestial. Initially, Ego had only a brain, which gradually developed into a planet over time. Though incomplete, Ego's power was still immense, capable of destroying fleets of spaceships with a mere gesture. As Ego's son, Star-Lord inherited half of his celestial bloodline. For now, though, Star-Lord was just like an ordinary human, albeit with a unique body. At this moment, Quill was walking on Morag, searching for something. Before long, using advanced technology, he arrived at a dilapidated palace. As he walked inside, Quill began to awkwardly dance along the way. After dealing with some filthy creatures, he reached a grand hall. Inside the hall, a glowing beam of light held a silver orb the size of a fist, the orb containing the Power Stone. The beam was a security measure to protect the orb. Clearly, breaking through the beam to retrieve the orb would be difficult. Fortunately, Quill was prepared. He placed a small gravity device on the ground. In no time, the orb was pulled by the device, moving toward it under the force of gravity. With a flash, the orb broke free from the beam and fell onto the device. As Quill happily picked up the orb, unaware of the two ships that had followed him to the planet, a warning sounded as several aliens burst into the room. "Put it down." The leader, a black-skinned alien holding an energy gun, pointed it at Quill and threatened, "Hurry up, put it down." Facing the situation, Quill reluctantly threw the orb down. Looking at the guns aimed at him, he quickly raised his hands and explained, "Hey, man, it's down. Relax, no problem here." The black-skinned alien picked up the orb and demanded, "How did you know about this?" Quill immediately lied, "How could I know about this? I'm just a scavenger, picking through stuff here and there." Unfortunately, the alien wasn't fooled and coldly replied, "You don't look like a scavenger. You're wearing Ravager gear." Quill realized then that the alien had recognized his identity as part of the Ravagers, a group of space pirates. Thinking quickly, Quill tried to bluff again, "I picked this up too." After some back and forth, when the aliens tried to capture him, Quill saw an opening and kicked the orb toward the alien holding him. In the next second, the orb glowed as it struck the alien. Then, a terrifying sight unfolded. Energy surged out from the orb, instantly vaporizing the aliens from head to toe. Quill drew the twin energy pistols from his waist and shot the black-skinned alien, grabbing the orb once more. With the orb in hand, he made a run for it. Energy blasts exploded behind him, creating craters as Quill desperately fled. After a frantic chase, Quill barely reached his ship, laughing as he climbed aboard and made his escape. A while later, as he safely fled, Quill received a call from Yondu, his adoptive father. Yondu had taken Quill from Earth as part of Ego's orders. But after discovering Ego's sinister plans, Yondu chose to raise Quill rather than hand him over to the Celestial, giving him the chance to grow freely, away from Ego's control. During the call, Yondu questioned the whereabouts of the orb. However, Quill had no intention of handing it over, choosing instead to betray his crew. After an unpleasant exchange, Yondu hung up and immediately put a bounty on Quill's head. Back on Morag, a figure dressed in white appeared, holding the blue tesseract. It was Syd, now wearing his white knight outfit. So, this is Morag. The tesseract really is impressive, it actually brought me here. Glancing at the desolate, dark environment around him, Syd frowned. Not wanting to stay in such a gloomy place for long, he began searching. After some time, he stopped and frowned at the battle marks left on the ground. They're already gone. Fortunately, he knew where Star-Lord was headed next. In the next moment, he gripped the tesseract once more. With a flash of blue light, he disappeared from Morag. The blue light flickered, and Syd's figure reappeared on another planet, Xander. As he appeared, Syd's eyes lit up with curiosity. The environment here was very similar to Earth, but the buildings and surroundings were cleaner and more advanced. At this moment, he was floating in the sky. While Syd marveled at his new surroundings, the aliens on the streets below had their mouths agape, stunned by his sudden appearance. End of chapter. Chapter 240, Chapter 240. 1000 PS reached. I think. Next goal, 1500 PS. As Syd glanced around his surroundings, he became curious about Xander. This planet was the capital of the Nova Empire and could be considered the most inclusive planet in the galaxy. On Xander, one could find all sorts of species, without discrimination or war. Syd slightly lowered his head, scanning the scene below, and found this to be true. Apart from the remarkably clean environment, he also saw many strange-looking aliens. Most of them were humanoid, though their skin and facial features were odd. As Syd observed from above, the inhabitants of Xander, along with visiting aliens, stared upward, their mouths agape. What were they seeing? Was someone actually floating in the air? The people of Xander were shocked by this sight. Even on their advanced planet, no one had the ability to float in the air. No matter what kind of alien species they were, none had ever seen someone fly. Yet here was a person, defying all logic, floating in midair. Isn't this person the one who suddenly appeared here? How is he flying? Who is this guy? The aliens below were filled with curiosity and confusion. Moreover, some of them noticed the radiant blue cube Syd was holding in his hand. What is that thing? Someone wondered, intrigued. Meanwhile, on another part of Xander. The people of Xander are a bunch of dimwits, all of them going about their pointless, meaningless lives. It's pathetic. A small raccoon-like creature, walking upright and carrying a silver gun on its back, was grumbling endlessly about the Xandarians. This being was Rocket, an alien raccoon with enhanced intelligence due to genetic modification. Agile and skilled in all kinds of weapons, he was a sharpshooter and currently worked as a bounty hunter. Soon, he would join Star-Lord in forming the Guardians of the Galaxy. Right, Groot. Rocket turned to see his companion, a humanoid tree named Groot, bent over a fountain, eagerly gulping down water. Groot. Could you stop drinking from the dirty fountain? That's disgusting. Rocket complained. Groot shook his head in denial. I saw you drink it with my own eyes. Why are you lying to me? Rocket was about to launch into another tirade when a sudden alarm beeped from the transparent panel he was carrying. It seemed that a certain wanted target had appeared, triggering the alert. Oh. Rocket quickly checked the transparent panel and exclaimed in excitement, looks like we've got a job. Let's see, unlucky guy, who's paying to catch you? As he spoke, the panel displayed a line of data. Target for capture, Peter Quill. Bring him in alive. Employer, Yondu Udanta. Bounty, 40,000 units. Seeing Star-Lord's picture and the information, Rocket's face lit up with joy. 40,000 units. Groot, we're about to hit the jackpot. Turning to Groot, Rocket saw that he was still drinking from the fountain. With a sigh, Rocket lowered his head in exasperation. A little later. Rocket had been tracking Star-Lord, watching him enter a shop. Mr. Quill. Seeing the person who had just entered, a white-skinned alien who looked nearly human showed a look of surprise. Broker, I've got the orb, Star-Lord said, pulling the orb from his coat pocket and placing it on the table. Mission complete. Yondu didn't come, the broker asked, puzzled. At the mention of his adoptive father, Star-Lord was quick to deflect. Without betraying his plans to go rogue, he maintained a calm expression and replied, "He wanted to, but he sent me instead. He asked me to tell you that your eyebrows are the best in the business." The broker seemed to suspect something but said nothing more. At this point, Star-Lord's gaze drifted to the silver sphere on the table. Curious about the object that had a high bounty on it, he asked, "What exactly is this thing?" The broker replied, "It's my policy never to disclose my clients' names or their requests." Star-Lord frowned. "I almost got killed for this thing." The broker casually replied, "That's just part of the job. Risks come with the profession." Realizing he wouldn't get any answers, Star-Lord remembered the aliens who had attacked him earlier. Those freaks with tubes on their heads said they were working for some guy named Ronan. At the mention of Ronan, the broker froze, as if the name triggered something. He muttered, "Ronan." In the next instant, the broker hurried over to Star-Lord, apologizing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Quill, but if Ronan's involved, I can't make this deal." With that, he grabbed the orb from the table and shoved it back into Star-Lord's hands. "Hey, what the hell?" Star-Lord protested as he was pushed back. "Who's this guy?" The broker explained, "Ronan is a radical from the Kree Empire who despises the peace treaty. He won't rest until Xander, our civilization, is wiped out." Kree Empire? Knowing how powerful the Kree Empire was in the galaxy, Star-Lord quickly understood why the broker was so frightened. Even though he got the situation, Star-Lord was still angry at being shoved out of the shop. "Calm down," he tried to reason. "I absolutely don't want to get involved with someone like that," the broker insisted, unmoved. "Oh, but it's okay to mess with me." Star-Lord snapped, irritated. "I'm sorry, Mr. Quill, but I must ask you to leave," the broker declared, opening the door and forcefully pushing Star-Lord outside. Standing in front of the shop, Star-Lord was fuming. "Hey, we had a deal." Before he could argue further, Star-Lord turned and saw a woman with black hair and green skin walking by. At a glance, Star-Lord was captivated by her appearance, feeling a little bashful. "What's wrong?" the green-skinned woman, who had the same skin tone as the Hulk, asked. Star-Lord, his tone softening, pointed at the shop and replied, "That guy inside broke his deal with me. I really hate people with no integrity." Introducing himself, he quickly added, "Peter Quill, also known as Star-Lord." End of chapter. Chapter 241, Chapter 241. Gamera smiled, "Looks like you're a man of integrity, right?" "Well, I wouldn't say that, but others tend to praise me for it," Star-Lord shamelessly replied. "I'm a low-key guy, I never boast about myself." As he spoke, he tossed the orb in his hand up and down, trying to hide his awkwardness. But before he could toss it a few more times, the fleeting camaraderie between them crumbled instantly. Without warning, Gamera stepped forward, snatched the orb from his hand, and kicked him hard in the stomach. Before Star-Lord could react, Gamera had already turned and sprinted away. Holding his stomach in disbelief, Star-Lord quickly pulled out a small restraint device. He threw it at Gamera's back, and mid-air, it transformed into red energy ropes, binding her legs. With a thud, Gamera fell heavily to the ground. As she started untying the ropes from her legs, Star-Lord rushed forward from a distance. Fortunately for Gamera, her reflexes were sharp, and she kicked Star-Lord away again. After a brief scuffle, Gamera pinned Star-Lord down and drew a knife from her waist, preparing to stab him. If nothing changed, Star-Lord's fate would be sealed. However, just as Gamera was about to strike, a small raccoon suddenly pounced, knocking her aside. At the same time, Groot, with a bag in hand, extended branches from his body, attempting to shove Gamera into the bag. "No, not her. Can't you even tell the difference between men and women?" Rocket the raccoon grumbled as he wrestled with Gamera, futilely trying to hold her down. In the next moment, Rocket yelped in pain as Gamera struck him, and he quickly jumped away from her. While they fought, Star-Lord seized the opportunity to snatch the orb off the ground and made a run for it. But before he could get far, Gamera, freed from Groot's branches, bent down, picked up a silver rod, and hurled it straight at Star-Lord's hand. Whoosh! The rod flew through the air, striking Star-Lord's hand with a painful thud. Ow! Star-Lord yelped as the orb slipped from his grasp and rolled along the ground. Breaking free of Groot's branches, Gamera sprinted toward the orb and scooped it up, ready to flee again. But before she could get far, Star-Lord tackled her once more, knocking her down. Using her superior strength, Gamera pinned Star-Lord to the ground and taunted, "Idiot, you should really learn to be smarter." "The thing is, I'm not much of a learner," Star-Lord shot back, using the moment of distraction to grab the orb from her hand. Just as Gamera was about to react, the crowd of Xandarians surrounding them suddenly gasped in astonishment. "Look! This is unbelievable." The people of Xander pointed skyward, their eyes wide with shock. Even Rocket and Groot stopped in their tracks to gaze upward. "I must be seeing things," Rocket muttered, dumbfounded. Both Gamera and Star-Lord paused their fight, instinctively looking up as well. What they saw was someone descending from the sky. He wore a pristine white outfit, and a sleek black mask adorned his face. Normally, such an appearance wouldn't be too remarkable, but the fact that this person was floating in midair made all the difference. Moreover, his entire aura exuded an extraordinary nobility and divinity. Just looking at him filled them with a powerful sense of pressure and unease. "Who is this guy? He seems like someone really important." Both Gamera and Star-Lord were filled with mixed emotions. Gamera, who had grown up under Thanos, had encountered all sorts of people during her years of training and countless battles. She had seen all kinds of powerful figures. But she had never encountered someone who could give her such immense pressure, like this person floating in front of her. Especially the fact that he could fly, it was clear he wasn't ordinary. As for Star-Lord, his mind raced with one thought: this was probably a big shot, and it would be best not to offend him. Just as they were both filled with fear and doubt, wondering what this mysterious figure intended to do, the person slowly raised his hand, which glowed faintly red. In the next moment, to Gamera's shock and Star-Lord's disbelief, the silver sphere in Star-Lord's hand was enveloped in red energy and gently floated into the air. By the time Gamera and Star-Lord snapped back to their senses, the orb had already landed in the mysterious figure's hand. "My orb!" Gamera and Star-Lord both cried out in alarm, preparing to rush forward and take it back. However, seeing the person calmly examining the orb, they hesitated. Star-Lord quickly spoke up, "Hey, sir, could you give me back that thing? It was mine originally." He was trying to reason, feeling uncertain about confronting this clearly formidable person. Gamera, hearing this, decided to wait and see how the figure would react before making her next move. Syd, who had been toying with the silver sphere, raised his head slightly in response, ready to speak. But before he could, something else caught his attention. Suddenly, a change occurred. The sound of engines revving filled the air, and beams of yellow light shone down on the area. These yellow beams of light enveloped Rocket, Groot, Star-Lord, Gamera, and even Syd himself. As the light surrounded them, Star-Lord and the others were lifted into the air, unable to resist or break free. Of course, this did not include Syd. The energy required to restrain him was far too great, and the ships above were nowhere near powerful enough to hold him. Besides, he was already floating on his own. The source of the light was a fleet of high-tech starfish-shaped ships. From one of the ships, a voice commanded, "Subject 89P13, drop your weapon." "Oh, damn," Rocket groaned, reluctantly tossing aside his guns. The voice from the ship continued, "By the authority of the Nova Corps, you are all under arrest for public endangerment." Soon, a group of Nova Corps officers arrived, quickly detaining Star-Lord, Gamera, and the others. As they were restrained, Star-Lord and his companions looked utterly dejected, as if they had lost everything. Their faces were filled with sorrow. Faced with the powerful Nova Corps ships and their officers, they wisely chose to surrender without putting up any resistance. They all knew there was no way their flesh and blood could stand up against the advanced ships and skilled members of the Nova Corps. Surrendering was the only sensible option. Meanwhile, the Nova Corps officers, unsure of what to do with Syd, hesitated, unsure how to handle someone still floating in midair. End of chapter. Chapter 242, Chapter 242. The figure floating in midair seemed to be doing so by his own power, without any assistance from their vehicles. As the Nova Corps officers observed him, they couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder. After some hesitation, they decided to proceed with the plan to arrest this mysterious man floating in the air. Under the gaze of Star-Lord and the others, the mysterious man in white calmly spoke, "I advise you not to do this." This time, he made no effort to disguise his voice. In an instant, the mysterious and ethereal tone of his voice echoed through the surroundings, leaving everyone in a daze. No one had ever heard such a voice before, mysterious and profound, almost as if it belonged to a divine being. The Nova Corps officers, preparing to make their arrest, felt the weight of his words most intensely. With his words, the invisible pressure he exerted on them grew heavier. As they gazed upon the figure floating above them, they felt as if they were standing before someone of immense status. It was as though they were mere mortals, while this person was a being from the heavens. Yes, although this figure had done nothing in particular, they instinctively felt that he was above them. And at that moment, their attempt to arrest him felt like a sacrilege, an act of disrespect. The sheer sense of this being's superiority caused discomfort and left them deeply unsettled. Who exactly are you? Who was this being? Why had he come to their planet Xander? What were his intentions? The Nova Corps officers were filled with unease and uncertainty. It wasn't just them, Rocket Raccoon and the others, who had been in a state of despair, were also filled with shock. Oh, for crying out loud, who is this guy? Rocket muttered in disbelief, his mouth hanging open. In all his life, he had never encountered anyone who could make him feel so insignificant just by looking at them. The sheer aura of divinity emanating from this person made Rocket realize that this guy was definitely someone of incredible importance. Of course, this was all just his conjecture. He couldn't yet be certain of the figure's true identity. There was too little information about this person to form any solid conclusions. Maybe, once this guy revealed more of himself, they'd have a clearer idea of who he was. Rocket's curiosity piqued as he pondered this. Nearby, Gamera's expression was constantly shifting. Not even Thanos had ever made her feel this way. The pressure this figure exerted seemed far greater than that of her adoptive father, Thanos. While Gamera was filled with questions about the mysterious figure's identity, Star-Lord and the nearby Xandarians were having similar thoughts. In fact, because of the overwhelming aura of mystery surrounding this person, Star-Lord even entertained the unbelievable thought that perhaps the Nova Corps ships and officers, whom he had considered unbeatable, might be no match for this man. As this thought crossed his mind, Star-Lord almost laughed at himself, shaking his head. How could that be possible? It was just this man's mysteriousness giving him an illusion of invincibility. After all, no living being could possibly stand up to such advanced weapons and technology. Even one of these ships could turn a person into Swiss cheese with a single shot. While Star-Lord and the others were lost in their thoughts and the Nova Corps officers remained uncertain about how to handle the situation, Syd furrowed his brow, lost in thought. He was considering whether to simply leave. After a moment of reflection, he glanced at Star-Lord and the others in the distance and made a decision. He would stay for now and see how things unfolded. After all, it didn't matter where he trained to improve his strength, and he was feeling a little bored. This could be an opportunity to observe Star-Lord's antics firsthand. Moreover, Syd realized that if he simply left with the orb, it could trigger a chain reaction, potentially preventing the formation of the Guardians of the Galaxy, or even causing the deaths of some key members. This was entirely possible. Without the orb containing the Power Stone, Star-Lord, Gamera, and the rest of the Guardians would have no chance of defeating Ronan. It was very likely that some of them would die. Syd shook his head quietly. If they disappeared, it would cause a series of events to spiral out of control, and the timeline would drastically change. The advantage of knowing the future would be lost entirely. Although his presence had already caused some shifts in the storyline, he still wanted to keep things as stable as possible. With this in mind, he turned his gaze to the hesitant and unsure Nova Corps officers. "I will go with you." The mysterious voice echoed softly. In the next moment, whether it was Star-Lord and the others, the Nova Corps, or the surrounding Xandarians, everyone looked stunned. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. Wasn't this powerful figure supposed to resist arrest and leave forcefully? What was going on? Everyone was in disbelief, even the Nova Corps officers. They had already been debating among themselves whether they should try to stop him when he eventually left, but they never expected this. The Nova Corps officer, who had earlier declared Star-Lord and the others guilty, hesitated and asked, "You'll come with us, for sure?" Syd nodded slightly. After exchanging uncertain glances, the Nova Corps officers cautiously approached, unsure of what to do next. Before they could act, Syd added, "You lead the way, and I will follow." Hearing this, the officers hesitated but ultimately decided to play it safe. This man's identity was unknown, and he appeared to be someone of great importance. Better to get him back to headquarters and figure things out from there. With that decision, they refrained from making any further moves. The Nova Corps led Star-Lord and the others ahead, while Syd hovered half a meter above the ground, silently following them. Watching this, Star-Lord looked at the Nova Corps officer restraining him and immediately felt indignant. "Hey, this isn't fair," he grumbled. The Nova Corps soldier beside him, trying to lighten the tension brought by Syd's presence, smirked, "Ha, you'd better behave, Prince Star." Star-Lord corrected him, "It's Star-Lord." "Oh, my bad, Star-Lord," the soldier teased. He then turned to his fellow officers and explained, "Yeah, I've caught this guy before for petty theft. That's his nickname." End of chapter. Chapter 243, Chapter 243. Come on, man, Star-Lord is a legendary name for a thief. Star-Lord tried to defend himself. "Don't be so down, brother, your nickname is pretty cool." At the Xander Weapons Division headquarters. Ronan is destroying our outposts across the galaxy. Shouldn't the Kree Empire at least acknowledge this with some kind of reaction? In a pristine white hall, a middle-aged woman with white hair, dressed in a dark blue uniform, was angrily questioning the projection of a man in front of her. The projection showed a middle-aged Kree man with blue skin, the same race as Ronan, and he calmly retorted, "We've signed a peace treaty, Nova Prime. What more do you want from us?" Nova Prime, recognizing that this man was trying to wash his hands of the situation, with Ronan's actions being portrayed as merely personal, became furious. At the very least, the Kree Empire should issue a statement condemning Ronan's actions. He's massacring children, destroying families. However, the Kree men remained unmoved. "Sorry, that's your problem, not ours. I've got more important things to deal with." With that, he cut off the transmission. "Bastard." Nova Prime cursed. Just then, an officer stepped in to give a report. "Nova Prime, I have some good news. We've captured one of Ronan's associates." Nova Prime's expression shifted to one of surprise. Ronan's associate? She didn't seem too concerned at first. After all, it was just one of Ronan's associates, not Ronan himself. But the officer continued the report. "Besides this associate, Gamera, we've also found a mysterious individual among them. This person is incredibly enigmatic, and it seems their status is quite unusual. They're currently being held in our prison, but we'll need your decision on how to proceed." Upon hearing this, Nova Prime, who hadn't been too interested initially, was now visibly astonished. A mysterious individual. Who could warrant such special treatment? Unusual status. Nova Prime was both curious and surprised. In the interrogation room, several members of the Nova Corps were reviewing the profiles of Gamera and the others as they stood in front of them. Gamera, surgically enhanced and trained to be a living weapon. She's also the adopted daughter of the Mad Titan Thanos. Thanos sent both you and your sister, Nebula, to work for Ronan. It's clear that Thanos and Ronan are working together. After finishing Gamera's profile, they moved on to Rocket Raccoon. Subject 89P13, also known as Rocket, is the result of illegal genetic and neuromechanical experimentation on lower life forms. At this point, one of the other Nova Corps members, curious about Groot, asked, "What is that thing?" He's Groot, a Flora Colossus, a plant-like humanoid species. He's currently partnered with Subject 89P13, serving as his personal bodyguard and houseplant. Next, they turned to Star-Lord. Peter Jason Quill, originally from Terra, was raised by a group of space pirates known as the Ravagers, led by Yondu Udonta. The officer next to him commented, "What a bunch of galactic scum." The scene then shifted to Syd, who was still floating peacefully in midair with his eyes closed, seemingly lost in thought. Noticing the attention, Syd briefly opened his eyes, glanced at them, and then closed his eyes again. This mysterious figure suddenly appeared in our capital of Xander. He possesses the ability to fly and manipulate objects. His identity is unknown, though he appears to be of considerable importance, and his purpose remains unclear. As they watched the figure in the white robe projected on the screen, the Nova Corps officers hesitated. Among all the individuals they had captured, this person was by far the most concerning to the Nova Corps. They wanted to find out who he really was, but they had no leads at the moment. It might take them several days to uncover this individual's true identity. For now, because of his mysterious and unknown status, they dared not act rashly. Among the captured individuals, he was the most extraordinary one. Anyone who didn't know better might even think he was just visiting the prison for leisure. Especially since, throughout the entire time, he had remained floating in midair, further adding to the sense of mystique. In the end, the Nova Corps officers came to a decision. Send them to the KYLN prison. High above the vastness of space, in the maximum security KYLN prison surrounded by an asteroid field, a group of new inmates arrived. Star-Lord and the others, their hands bound by blue high-tech restraints, walked through the corridors leading to the prison's main area. Rocket Raccoon started speaking up. The criminals in here are either ruthless or insane, but fortunately, that's not my problem because I'm getting out of here soon. He boasted, I've escaped from 22 prisons already. This one's no different. You should be grateful this crazy woman showed up. Otherwise, Groot and I would be counting your bounty right now, and you'd be getting torn apart by Yondu and his Ravagers. Rocket mocked Star-Lord. Unwilling to back down, Star-Lord replied, I've had plenty of people trying to kill me over the years, but I'm not going to let some walking tree and talking raccoon take me down. Raccoon? What's a raccoon? Rocket asked, bewildered. That's you, idiot. The two bickered a bit more, but then Star-Lord's gaze shifted toward the mysterious figure in white floating beside him, prompting him to make a comment. This doesn't seem fair. Just look at him, he's treating this prison like a vacation spot. He gestured with his chin toward the figure. Everyone instinctively turned their heads, and their eyes twitched in disbelief as they realized how unfair the situation was. The mysterious man in white was still floating in midair, without any restraints, and appeared entirely unbothered by the situation, as if he was above it all. I think he's getting a bit too cocky. Star-Lord muttered. Shut up, idiot. Gamera snapped. As they approached the main area of the prison, inside, a group of prisoners wearing yellow jumpsuits was already gossiping. Did you hear? One of Ronan's accomplices just got thrown into this prison. Really? We should give her a proper welcome. Yeah. Even in a prison filled with dangerous criminals, Ronan's name stirred up intense hatred. Soon, the prisoners spotted the new arrivals, Gamera, Star-Lord, Groot, and Rocket Raccoon. Despite Groot's unusual appearance, the prisoners weren't fazed. In a galaxy filled with bizarre-looking aliens, this was nothing new. However, their attention quickly shifted to the figure floating half a meter above the ground, wearing white robes instead of the yellow prison jumpsuits. He immediately stood out. End of chapter. Chapter 244, Chapter 244. Every inmate entering the KYLN prison must undergo disinfection and cleaning before donning the standard yellow prison uniform. However, the individual who followed behind the others was neither wearing the yellow jumpsuit nor had undergone any disinfection. He simply strolled right into the KYLN prison in his own attire. If it was just the lack of protocol, the prisoners might assume he had some powerful connections and would feel a sense of fear. But the manner in which he entered raised even more questions. He didn't walk, he floated in. What was happening? Who is this guy? How did he end up in this prison? The prisoners were shocked, left with growing uncertainty. Initially, they had plans to give Ronan's associate a proper welcome, but now they hesitated, unsure of their next move. The entire prison fell into a momentary silence. It wasn't until Syd glanced around at his surroundings and floated into his own private cell that the prisoners snapped out of their daze. Soon after Syd departed, leaving Star-Lord and the others behind, the remaining group fell victim to the prisoners' aggression. With a thud, something smashed against Star-Lord's head. Bang. 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 Prisoners hurled objects continuously at Gamera, and even Star-Lord, Groot, and Rocket Raccoon weren't spared from the barrage. Kill her. Kill the murderer. Get out, murderer. You're dead. The inmates shouted, enraged. Rocket looked at Gamera and muttered, see. This one's got quite the reputation. Plenty of prisoners here lost family members to Ronan and his thugs. She won't last more than a day. Star-Lord, shaken, asked hesitantly, but won't the guards protect her? The guards only care about keeping us from breaking out. They don't give a damn about what happens inside, Rocket responded, rolling his eyes. Star-Lord was left dumbfounded. Gamera then spoke up, "You all probably think this is a nightmare, but compared to my past, this feels more like a dream." As she spoke, Gamera's mind wandered to memories of her past. When she was a child, she belonged to the Zeaberii race. Then, one day, Thanos invaded her planet, forcing her people to line up in two groups, only to wipe out half of them. This, he believed, would leave enough resources for the survivors. Over time, as she grew under Thanos' tutelage, the horrific events she witnessed made her more and more opposed to his ideals. Recently, when she learned of Thanos' plans to collaborate with Ronan and destroy yet another planet, Xander, she could no longer bear it and chose to betray them. Just then, a hulking blue-skinned inmate approached, looking Star-Lord up and down with a leering grin. "Look at this fresh meat. I'm going to slather you in Glarnak jelly and have a feast." He caressed Star-Lord's face, making him visibly uncomfortable. Groot, who couldn't stand by and watch, extended a branch into the blue-skinned inmate's nostril, causing him to scream in pain. The prisoners, who had been shouting moments before, gradually quieted down. Rocket, seizing the moment, pointed at Star-Lord and shouted, "I'll say this now, this guy is ours. If any of you think you can take him from us, you better think twice. Or better yet, why don't you try us and see how that goes?" With that, Rocket and Groot walked toward the cells, followed closely by Star-Lord, who, while hurrying after them, shouted, "I'm with them." As he walked, he added, "And by the way, I'm also friends with him." He pointed toward the mysterious figure in white, floating a short distance away. Hearing this, the prisoners, who had either been watching for entertainment or plotting something sinister, immediately faltered. Many of them cast apprehensive glances toward the still-floating white-clad figure, eyes shut and seemingly indifferent to everything around him. If it were only Rocket's warning, the prisoners might have brushed it off. But if this mysterious figure was involved, they suddenly felt a need to be cautious. In an instant, most of the prisoners' gazes shifted from Star-Lord, suddenly unsure of causing any more trouble. Star-Lord, surprised by their reaction, couldn't help but mutter, "Wow, this guy's connections really pay off." Still bewildered, he hurried past the fallen blue-skinned inmate and into the safety of his cell. After the group moved on, Gamera, walking alone behind them, was met with a barrage of threats and curses from some of the prisoners. "Your cell won't protect you. You're as good as dead. I'll kill you. You're done." It wasn't until Gamera stepped into her cell and the door shut behind her that the barrage of insults finally subsided. Because they had all entered together, their cells were located fairly close to one another. At that moment, Syd was sitting inside his cell, casually fiddling with the silver orb that held the Power Stone. He was pondering how to open it. Seeing this, Star-Lord couldn't contain his curiosity and asked, "What exactly is that thing? What makes it so valuable that everyone's after it?" Rocket and the others perked up their ears at the question, turning their attention toward Syd. It wasn't just them. Even some of the nearby prisoners, who could overhear the conversation, strained to listen in. They couldn't understand how this mysterious man in white had managed to bring something like that into the prison. They were also curious to know what this strange object really was. Syd glanced at them briefly, then continued to toy with the silver orb as he answered nonchalantly, "Before the dawn of creation, there were 6 singularities. After the Big Bang, the universe was formed, and these singularities were forged into concentrated particles. This orb holds one of those particles. You can call it an infinity stone. Whoever holds one of these stones has the power to wipe out entire civilizations in an instant," Syd explained calmly. Since they would find out sooner or later, Syd decided there was no point in hiding the truth and casually shared the origin of the Infinity Stones, or at least one version of it. Indeed, this was the origin of the Infinity Stones in the current universe. However, there was another version, the one from the comic universe, where the Infinity Stones originated from the vengeful goddess Nemesis. According to that version, Nemesis, growing weary of the loneliness of the universe, chose to shatter herself into 7 gems, the 6 Infinity Stones and an additional ego gem. Collecting all 7 would resurrect the vengeful goddess. And when she re-emerged, her return would spell the end of all things. Of course, that story had nothing to do with the Infinity Stone Syd currently held. The origins of the 2 sets of stones were entirely different. In the reality he was in, the Infinity Stones were indeed formed from primordial singularities. End of chapter. Chapter 245, Chapter 245. At this moment, upon hearing Syd's words, everyone, including Star-Lord and the rest, looked baffled, overwhelmed with disbelief. What do you mean, before the universe? Are you kidding? Who would believe something like that? Star-Lord scoffed. I think he's just messing with us, Rocket chimed in. Destroy an entire civilization with this little thing. Rocket was entirely unconvinced. Not only Rocket but Star-Lord and everyone else had a hard time believing Syd's words. It sounded way too far-fetched. To claim that this small object could obliterate an entire civilization. That was beyond their comprehension. And if this was just one of the stones, where were the others? They couldn't wrap their heads around it. Syd raised an eyebrow at their reactions but didn't pay much attention to their disbelief. He continued studying the orb in his hand. After some attempts, he realized the orb wouldn't easily open, it required a specific method. Of course, Syd knew he could forcibly break it open. The Infinity Stones themselves were practically indestructible, but the outer shell wasn't as tough. However, breaking the shell wasn't the real problem. The issue was that the Power Stone inside was volatile and dangerous. The Power Stone, unlike the other Infinity Stones, reacted violently to physical touch. Anyone without the proper strength or resistance would die instantly from its energy. Syd was confident that his divine body could withstand the Power Stone's might, meaning he could potentially use it. However, he hesitated. But if I carry it around openly, could it trigger a chain reaction with the other Infinity Stones and cause an explosion? This thought made him reconsider breaking the orb by force. It seems like I should stick with Star-Lord and the others when they visit the Collector. Syd pondered his next move. He recalled that later on, Star-Lord and his crew would go to the Collector, who would use technology to safely open the orb. Speaking of the Collector, Syd remembered that he was a being who collected rare and unique artifacts from across the universe. Furthermore, the Collector was considered one of the Elders of the Universe, a group of ancient, powerful beings. The living planet, Ego, was also one of these Elders. As Syd thought about this, he solidified his plan: follow Star-Lord and his team to meet the Collector and gain access to the Power Stone safely. His attention then returned to the Power Stone itself. He recalled a scene from the future when the Collector explained the origin of the Infinity Stones and even showed footage of a Celestial using the Power Stone. In that footage, the Celestial known as Ison the Searcher had wielded the Power Stone and used it to annihilate an entire planet in mere moments. The power of the Infinity Stones truly depends on their wielder. Syd shook his head. When wielded by a Celestial, the Power Stone could destroy a planet in an instant. If he tried to use it, the result would be far less impressive. In fact, if Ronan or Star-Lord used it, it was doubtful they could even destroy a patch of land. It was clear the Infinity Stone's potential depended on the strength and endurance of the user. If Thanos had the power, he could have single-handedly taken down the Avengers with just the Power Stone. Syd continued, each member of the Celestials is at least on the level of a Skyfather, most being single-universe level entities, towering hundreds of meters tall. It's hard to compete with that. In terms of physicality, they were superior to most other life forms from the start. Nevertheless, Syd was confident that, given enough time, he would eventually surpass these so-called Celestials. With a flash of red light, Syd used his chaos magic to store the orb back in his backpack. He then closed his eyes once more, waiting for time to pass. Meanwhile, the prisoners who witnessed his display of power were left in shock and fear. Even though Star-Lord and his companions were somewhat familiar with Syd's abilities by now, they couldn't help but glance curiously at the backpack he carried. Star-Lord and Gamora, in particular, seemed most intrigued. Aside from their curiosity about the cosmic orb, they couldn't help but wonder if this mysterious man's backpack held anything else of value. Soon, it was time for lights out. Suddenly, a scuffle broke out, causing Syd to open his eyes from his meditative state. He glanced over in the direction of the disturbance. Several inmates had grabbed Gamora, pressing a knife to her throat. He overheard their conversation. "Take her to the shower room, it's easier to clean up the blood there." Hearing the commotion, Star-Lord woke up and immediately rushed out of his cell. Rocket stirred awake and asked, "Quill, where are you going?" "Quill." Meanwhile, in the shower room, the inmates pinned Gamora against the wall. "Gamora, you've committed countless atrocities across the universe. You are beyond redemption. Now, you've been sentenced to death." As they were about to carry out their sentence, a towering figure with red markings across his body entered the scene. It was Drax the Destroyer. Hidden nearby, Star-Lord and Rocket initially thought Drax was coming to rescue Gamora, but instead, they overheard him talking about how Ronan had killed his wife and daughter. Drax wanted to personally kill Gamora as revenge. The other inmates, unwilling to cross Drax, handed him the knife. Gamora seized the opportunity during their moment of distraction and fought back. However, despite her resistance, she was once again pinned to the wall, just moments away from death at Drax's hands. It was then that Star-Lord intervened. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Look, I get that you want revenge on Ronan, but killing her now. That's not the smartest play. With some persuasive words, Star-Lord managed to convince Drax to join them in their mission to take down Ronan. At this point, Gamora asked, "Why did you save me?" "I'm not really interested in whether you live or die," Star-Lord admitted. "Then why stop him from killing me?" Gamora pressed. Star-Lord, still cheeky, replied, "It's simple. You know where to sell that orb." Gamora frowned, "But we're all stuck in here. How do you plan on selling the orb?" Star-Lord glanced at Rocket and grinned. "Our good friend Rocket here has broken out of 22 prisons." Rocket, ever the braggart, boasted, "No prison can hold me. But once we're out, we're turning you in for that bounty with Yondu." Ugh. Changing the subject, Star-Lord asked Gamora, "So, how much is your buyer willing to pay for that orb?" The room fell silent for a moment. Gamora finally answered, 40 billion units. "What?" Rocket's voice cracked in disbelief. "My God," Star-Lord muttered, stunned. Suddenly, a thought struck him, and he whispered, 40 billion, could that mysterious guy's story about the stones actually be true? His face was filled with shock. End of chapter. Chapter 246, Chapter 246. 500 PS reached. Next goal, 1000 PS. Hearing the commotion from a distance, Syd glanced over and then dismissed it. It was clear that the members of the Guardians of the Galaxy had gathered. Rocket, Groot, Star-Lord, Gamora, and Drax. At that moment, Syd suddenly heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He looked up and saw Star-Lord, Gamora, Rocket, and the others walking over. "Hey, buddy, can we talk? How about giving that orb back to me?" Star-Lord pleaded. After he spoke, the mysterious man in white before him shook his head. Seeing this, Star-Lord's face shifted through several emotions before he made a decision and gritted his teeth. "All right, mysterious brother, I'll be honest with you. The orb in your hand is worth 4 billion, and we need to sell it. We can split the money evenly afterward." "Quill?" Rocket asked, surprised. Hearing this, Syd's eyes flickered slightly. "Sell it, huh?" It was clear that Star-Lord and the others were planning to head to the Collector next. Thinking of this, Syd nodded in agreement under the tense gaze of Star-Lord and his crew. Seeing that he agreed, Rocket and the others became excited. "All right, now we need to figure out how to escape this damned prison," Rocket said. "Only by working together can we make a better escape," he added, glancing at Star-Lord, Gamora, and even Syd. They hadn't been discussing for long when alarms suddenly blared. Everyone turned to see Groot had already removed an energy cell from the prison. "Oh, great. Looks like we're starting earlier than planned," Rocket said. Exasperated, slapping his face. Star-Lord and the others quickly started looking for tools to escape. Meanwhile, a series of mechanical drones, like flying machines, swarmed from different corners of the prison. "Prisoners, drop your equipment and return to your cells, or we will open fire," the guards of the KYLN prison warned. Syd watched as the drones surrounded them. When it became clear they weren't going to surrender, the drones opened fire. Bang, bang, bang. Bullets sprayed toward them. Star-Lord, Rocket, and the others scattered in a panic, looking quite embarrassed. Syd, however, remained the calmest. Few drones aimed at him, and even when they did, he effortlessly blocked the bullets with his red chaos magic. Seeing how easy it was for him, Star-Lord and the others couldn't help but feel envious. "This isn't fair at all," Rocket grumbled. "What was that red glow?" "It blocked the bullets." Star-Lord muttered in shock. "This mysterious guy really has some tricks." Glad we didn't piss him off earlier. The scene descended into chaos. Syd silently observed. He followed Rocket and the others to the prison's control room. With some quick manipulation, Rocket successfully shut down the gravity control system. The guards attacking them floated into the air, looking panicked. Gamera was surprised. This guy shut off the artificial gravity. Everything is weightless except for this. Then, with a few more moves, Rocket detached the control room from its track. Under external gravitational influence, it slowly began to drift. Drones controlled by Rocket attached themselves to the bottom of the prison control room. As their engines powered up, the entire control room began to float into the air. Within moments, Rocket had turned the prison control room into a makeshift spaceship. "I told you guys, I had a plan," Rocket said smugly. As he spoke, he controlled the drones, lifting the control room and flying it forward. After a bumpy flight, the control room crashed onto the ground, and Star-Lord made a new discovery. "There it is, my ship. The Milano, orange and blue, just around that corner." Syd floated along, following Rocket and the others toward the Milano. Meanwhile, Star-Lord went off to retrieve his confiscated Walkman. Soon after, they boarded the Milano and flew out of the KYLN prison, finally entering the vastness of space. Glancing at the dark, endless expanse of the universe, Syd raised his brows. If it weren't for the cosmic cube in his possession and the fact that his godly body hadn't reached the 5th level, he wouldn't have dared come to such a place. Even now, sitting inside the ship, he felt a bit uneasy. The void of space was like a nightmare for those with claustrophobia. Even for normal people, staring at it for too long could make one uncomfortable. Before long, Star-Lord returned. With a whoosh, the Milano flew off toward the Collector's location as planned. However, shortly after they left the prison, more chaos erupted inside. "Please, I don't know where they went, I swear," someone pleaded. Ronan, accompanied by Nebula and a group of Marauder soldiers, had invaded the KYLN prison, interrogating prisoners. Unfortunately, no matter how hard they pressed, none of the prisoners knew Rocket and the others' whereabouts. At that moment, Nebula, Thanos' other adopted daughter, with her blue skin and mostly mechanical body, said, if any of them knew where they went, they would have told us by now. Suddenly, she appeared anxious and said, "Ronan, the Nova Corps has sent a fleet to defend the prison." Hearing this, the tall, blue-skinned Ronan was forced to retreat. "Fine. Send out the Necrocraft. Search every corner of the galaxy. Find the orb at all costs." "What about the prison?" Nebula asked. "We can't let the Nova Corps know we were here." "Cleanse it," Ronan coldly ordered. Time quickly passed in the depths of space. "Everyone, pay attention, we're almost there." Rocket's voice echoed. Everyone moved to the cockpit, and as they looked out, they were shocked by the sight before them. Floating in the distance was an enormous severed head. Buildings were visible within it from afar. Clearly, this massive head had been modified by someone. "Whoa!" Star-Lord exclaimed. "What is that?" Drax asked. Gamera glanced at it and explained, "This place is called Nowhere. It's the severed head of an ancient celestial being." She added a warning, "Be careful when we go in." "Rocket, this place is lawless." As they stared in awe, Syd also gazed at the scene before him, his expression changing slightly. He muttered, "Celestial remains, huh?" End of chapter. Chapter 247, Chapter 247. Syd realized something. He might have underestimated the Celestials. The gigantic head floating before him seemed to stretch for several kilometers. If it had an entire body, just how colossal would it be? Even if the Celestials possessed no supernatural powers, their sheer physical size would be enough to crush anyone with their massive bodies. Furthermore, the fact that such a large body could move meant that the Celestial's physical form must be incredibly solid and dense, or else it would collapse after only a few steps. Suddenly, Syd recalled the Celestial that appeared in the Eternals TV series. The height of that Celestial was recorded at around 320,000 meters. Just thinking about it made him shudder. Could something like that even be dealt with by humans? How did Odin fight against this thing? Syd wondered. He remembered that the Allfather Odin, clad in the destroyer armor, had battled a Celestial. Although he eventually lost, he had managed to wound his opponent. It was becoming clear that Odin's power might have been far beyond what Syd had initially imagined, not as weak as he had thought. Perhaps I'm still far from reaching the level of a Skyfather. Syd shook his head in resignation. The more he learned, the more he realized how small his own strength was in comparison. At this moment, Gamera and the others glanced at him upon hearing him mutter about the Celestials. Celestials? What Celestials? Star-Lord and the others looked at him with a mix of curiosity and confusion. Syd glanced at them briefly and calmly replied, "The head you see before you is a Celestial's head." "There are creatures that huge?" Star-Lord gasped. Just imagining it sent chills down his spine. Under their gazes, Syd nodded and began to explain, "They are true gods, each possessing cosmic power on an unimaginable scale, and every one of them has specific functions. For instance, there's a celestial called Arishem the Judge. He can determine whether a planet's species should continue to exist or be eradicated, acting as a judge for the Celestials. But that doesn't mean that Arishem is only good for judging. On the contrary, every Celestial is extremely powerful." Gamera caught onto a key detail. Them. There was more than one. She felt a sense of dread creeping in. Rocket and the others were astonished. Star-Lord, shocked, asked, "Hey, man, how do you know all of this? Have you seen a Celestial before?" For a moment, everyone's eyes were on Syd. Gamera and the others were growing more convinced that this mysterious man in white was even more enigmatic than they had first thought. To know such secrets? Syd glanced at them but didn't bother answering Star-Lord's question. At that moment, the Milano flew through the eye socket of the Celestial's remains. As they entered, Star-Lord and the others were amazed. It was like a city inside, with buildings everywhere, and small machines floating around, seemingly harvesting something. Gamera explained, "Hundreds of years ago, the Tyvan group sent workers here to mine the organic materials from this skull. Bone, brain tissue, spinal fluid, all rare commodities, fetching high prices on the galactic black market." With her explanation, Star-Lord and the others gained a better understanding of nowhere. Soon, they disembarked from the ship. Watching the others walking ahead, Syd silently floated behind them. Along the way, they encountered various aliens, and there were quite a few astonished gasps. Star-Lord sighed, "Hey, buddy, could you stop floating around? You're distracting everyone and making it hard for us to walk." He glanced at the crowd gathering around them in shock, feeling both envious and jealous. Syd, however, paid him no mind, continuing to float silently without saying a word. After all, why walk when you can float? As for the onlookers, Syd simply ignored them. Affected by Syd's presence, Star-Lord and the others couldn't even enjoy their walk properly, and had no choice but to gather together and keep moving. After about half an hour, just as Star-Lord was feeling bored and about to ask Gamera something, a pink-skinned woman approached them. "Miss Gamera, my master has sent me to escort you." She gestured for them to follow. On the way, she stole a glance at the floating Syd, her eyes full of surprise. They followed her toward the collector's location. Soon, they arrived at their destination. As soon as they entered, Rocket couldn't help but complain, "This place is seriously creepy." They were surrounded by glass cases, each containing various items, some animals, some objects. The pink-skinned woman explained, "Here, we house the largest collection in the galaxy. Everything from animals to fossils, you name it." Syd glanced to his right. There, he saw a case containing a golden retriever. To the left, there was a strange-looking alien creature. Syd's mouth twitched slightly. However, just as he was about to ignore the surroundings and wait to meet the collector, hoping to use him to open the orb, he suddenly sensed something. He looked ahead. In one of the cases, there was a black stone. Syd could feel it emanating a divine energy, though it wasn't the power of the Asgardian gods. It seemed to belong to another realm. Is that an artifact? Instantly, Syd thought of items like Gungnir and Mjolnir. At that moment, the pink-skinned woman introduced, "Let me proudly present to you, Tannelir Tyvan, the collector." From the center of the room, amidst the various display cases, a middle-aged man with white hair turned around. The collector, Tannelir Tyvan, had been focused on Gamera, but when he noticed Syd floating behind the group, his face showed a mixture of surprise and admiration. It was as if he had spotted the perfect addition to his collection, his eyes burning with excitement. Syd's mouth twitched again. "Dear Gamera, long time no see. "And who might this be?" the collector asked, his gaze fixed on Syd. Syd's mysterious voice echoed in the quiet room, "Some call me the White Cloak. You can call me that as well." The moment the collector heard this, his expression changed slightly, and he looked intently at the men before him. Sensing that Syd's attention was on one of the collection items, he followed his gaze. Noticing the black stone, he began to explain. End of chapter. Chapter 248, Chapter 248. This is a mystical stone. Legend has it that whoever holds it can see their own death. Of course, that's just a rumor. So far, no one has successfully seen anything, though I've experimented with it, said the collector, Tannelir Tyvan. Perhaps it's missing a specific kind of energy. With that, he stopped explaining the black stone, which he had kept specifically due to the rumors and a sense that it was special. At this moment, his gaze fixated intensely on the mysterious man in white before him. "Sir, would you permit me to purchase your body?" "Of course, I would only take it after you've died." Hearing the collector's creepy request, Syd's mouth twitched, and Star-Lord and the others shuddered in disgust. Gamera, unable to stand it any longer, spoke up, "Enough with the chatter, Tyvan. We're here for serious business. We have something you need." As she spoke, Gamera glanced toward the mysterious man in white not far away. Syd, noticing this, understood what she meant. He glanced at the collector briefly and, after a moment of thought, decided not to use his chaos magic. Instead, he reached behind him and pulled out a black backpack. As he rummaged through the bag, the sound of clinking objects echoed, drawing the surprised and curious eyes of the collector and the others. What is that sound? Gems? Stones? Or something else? Star-Lord wondered instinctively, growing more curious about the backpack. Aside from the orb, what else was inside? What treasures could it hold? Soon, as they speculated, Syd pulled out a silver orb from the bag, the orb containing the Power Stone. At that moment, Gamera said, "Tyvan, we're here to show you this orb." "All right, then. Let's take a look at your item now," the collector nodded. With that, he took the silver orb from Syd's hand. As the collector walked toward the mechanical room, Syd cast a glance at the black stone in the distance. Truth be told, he had some interest in it. He thought that perhaps the rumors surrounding it weren't entirely false. After all, it was an artifact, and it likely did possess some form of divine power. Because of this, he briefly considered acquiring the stone for study. However, he didn't voice his thoughts aloud. Taking something from the collector's collection would be no small feat, and it wasn't likely that a few words would convince Tyvan to part with it. Syd remembered that later, the Power Stone would go out of control, destroying much of the collector's collection. Perhaps he could use that opportunity to obtain the black stone. With that thought in mind, he followed the collector into another room. After a series of manipulations, the collector placed the orb on a disassembly device. Then he said, "Oh, my new friends, let me explain. Before the birth of the universe." As he spoke, the collector began explaining the origin of the orb while operating the machine to dismantle it. The mechanical arms twisted in a rhythmic pattern, and the orb was successfully opened slightly. In an instant, purple light spilled out. At the same time, something the collector did caused projections to appear in the room, projections of the 6 Infinity Stones. The collector began to explain. These are the Infinity Stones. These stones can only be controlled by beings of immense, supernatural power. Watch this. In the holographic projection, a massive celestial clad in armor appeared, none other than Erisham the Judge. Holding a scepter embedded with the Power Stone, Erisham struck the ground with it. The Power Stone's purple energy surged forth, instantly destroying vast expanses of land and life, reducing everything to ash. Moments later, the purple energy engulfed an entire planet. The wielder of these stones can destroy entire civilizations in an instant, like harvesting wheat, effortlessly. The projection ended there, but it was clear what fate had befallen the planet. This also meant that, if it were Earth, Erisham could easily annihilate it as well. "I'm so scared I might wet myself," Star-Lord gasped, dumbfounded. He quickly turned to Syd, shocked. "So what you told us earlier was actually true?" Then he turned toward the collector, muttering, "Hey, what you just said sounds exactly like what he told us before. Are you two in on this together?" Gamera and the others nodded in agreement, confirming that the mysterious man in white had indeed said something similar earlier. Wait, that huge guy, was that a Celestial? Star-Lord asked. What did you just say? The Collector asked in surprise, staring at Star-Lord, astonished. How do you know about the Celestials? He asked. Star-Lord glanced at the mysterious man in white. Realizing the answer, the Collector was taken aback, deeply observing Syd. This man knew far more than expected. He even knew about the Celestials. Mysterious, far too mysterious. After regaining some composure, the Collector continued his explanation. There was once a group of people who tried to absorb this energy into their own bodies, but they were instantly turned to ash. In the projection, figures clad in black attempted to draw energy from the Power Stone. The purple energy exploded, erasing them from existence in an instant. At that moment, the orb was completely opened. A purple, glowing, oval-shaped stone floated quietly, unaffected by gravity. Gazing at the radiant Power Stone, the Collector trembled with excitement and admiration, exclaiming, "Magnificent! Absolutely unparalleled." Meanwhile, Rocket, growing impatient, sarcastically remarked, Yeah, we're all scared of you, old man. But we'd rather see some money." "How would you like to be paid?" the Collector asked in his soft voice. "Cut the nonsense, old-timer. Cash." Rocket snapped impatiently. "Very well." The Collector walked over to a cabinet and opened it, preparing to retrieve something. But just then, he noticed something. His gaze shifted toward the purple-skinned woman who had guided them in earlier. She was slowly approaching the Power Stone. The Collector's voice rang out in warning, "Karina. Step away." End of chapter. Chapter 249, Chapter 249. Just as the words left his mouth, the purple-skinned woman named Karina shouted, "I don't want to be your slave anymore." From a distance, Star-Lord and the others had a bad feeling about this. Syd narrowed his eyes slightly but didn't stop her from acting. Realizing what was about to happen, the Collector's heart sank, and he shouted, "No." The next second, Karina's gaze locked onto the Power Stone, and without hesitation, she reached out her right hand and grasped it tightly. Instantly, a violent reaction occurred, like hot oil meeting water. Sizzling sounds filled the air as the Power Stone's purple energy surged outward, sparking like small missiles. Boom. 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 A series of explosions followed, and under the impact of the Power Stone's energy, the various display cases shattered, leaving deep craters in the ground. Ugh. The Collector, Rocket, and the others scrambled for cover in panic. At that moment, as Star-Lord ducked and dodged, he instinctively turned to see how the mysterious man in white would avoid this catastrophe. What he saw left him speechless. The man merely lifted his right hand, and a layer of red light appeared, standing like a barrier before him. The flying purple energy from the Power Stone collided with the red light as if it were raindrops hitting a window, with hardly any effect. Seeing this, Star-Lord's jaw dropped, utterly bewildered. Oh my God! But before he could think further, Karina, who was holding the Power Stone, began to experience the consequences. The energy overflowing from the Power Stone was enough to destroy the surroundings, so what about Karina, who was facing the full brunt of its power? After all, she was just an ordinary person. In an instant, purple energy marks appeared on her body, her skin being eroded and disintegrated. Ah! Karina screamed. Purple energy filled her entire being, cracks forming across her skin. With a final scream, a terrifying explosion occurred. The immense purple energy surged outward, detonating and spreading across the room. Everything around was obliterated, and the entire building exploded in a blast. Groot carried Rocket as they fled, while Star-Lord and Gamora hid behind a wall, their hearts pounding with fear. In the midst of the destruction, as everyone thought they were all running for their lives, there was one figure calmly floating in the midst of the purple energy. Syd, using a barrier of chaos magic, was holding off the Power Stone's energy. While the Power Stone's energy was violent and powerful, it wasn't a full-force outburst. Coupled with Syd's chaos magic, which had reached level 4 and was further enhanced by other abilities, the explosion wasn't a threat to him at all. It felt like a breeze to him as he floated toward the case holding the black stone just moments before the explosion reached it. Using his chaos magic, he wrapped the black stone and guided it into his backpack. By the time he finished, the explosion had mostly subsided. In the distance, the Collector lay on the ground, slightly injured but otherwise unharmed. As for Groot and Rocket, they had already fled the scene. Then, a voice echoed through the air. "You." Star-Lord and Gamora cautiously peeked out from behind the wall, only to be shocked by the scene before them. Amidst the ruins, a figure in white floated in the air. In the surrounding devastation, he appeared completely unscathed, not even the corner of his clothes or their color had changed. This fact was not lost on the Collector, Star-Lord, or Gamora, who were all well aware of what it meant. It meant that this mysterious person had resisted the blast of the explosion head-on. Star-Lord was utterly dumbfounded. The terrifying explosion caused by the stone was blocked. Is this guy even human? The scene fell into a stunned silence. No one said a word. At that moment, footsteps could be heard from outside. It was Rocket and Groot, who had come rushing back in, worried after realizing the others hadn't made it out. Charging in, they reached the room. There, they saw Star-Lord, Gamora, and the others frozen in shock, as well as Syd, who was floating in midair, untouched by the chaos around him. Am I seeing things? Rocket rubbed his furry paw over his eyes. Had there not been an explosion just now? If there had been, how was Syd completely unharmed? As Rocket and Groot stood in disbelief, the floating figure moved. Syd drifted toward the Power Stone, which was now exposed. He extended his right hand. The red glow of chaos magic appeared once more. The purple glowing Power Stone floated up, enveloped in the red light. Syd reached out, as if preparing to grasp the Power Stone. Seeing this, Gamora and the others gasped in shock. "What are you doing?" Gamora cried out. Star-Lord exclaimed in disbelief, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, are you crazy?" Rocket's fur stood on end in fear. "Put it down," the Collector shouted frantically. At that moment, they found it hard to believe, was this mysterious man insane? Had he not seen what had just happened? Not to mention the destruction that had occurred in mere moments, but Karina, who had tried to hold the stone, had been turned to ash. Didn't he realize the danger of this stone? They were in utter disbelief. Even Rocket, who had earlier thought the Collector was exaggerating, now believed the stories about the Power Stone were true. This was indeed a dangerous object. At that moment, Rocket wished he could be as far away from the stone as possible. It was as if they could already see the moment when the mysterious man touched the purple stone, was overwhelmed by its energy, and exploded into dust. As they trembled in fear and couldn't stop him in time, Syd's calm expression didn't change as he grasped the Power Stone. Instantly, the stone emitted an intense purple glow, its terrifying energy surging out. The purple light began to spread across his body. "We're doomed." Rocket and the others muttered under their breath. Just as they felt overwhelmed with fear and were about to flee, the scene before them left them speechless. The purple light surrounding Syd's body was rapidly retracting, flowing back into him. Moreover, they noticed something peculiar. When Karina had tried to hold the stone earlier, her body had been covered in cracks and energy marks, unable to withstand the Power Stone's energy. But now, Syd showed no signs of damage whatsoever. What was happening? What was going on? Star-Lord and the others were left utterly stunned. End of chapter. Chapter 250, Chapter 250. You withstood the Power Stone's energy. The Collector, Tannelier Tyvan, was in shock. Just moments ago, Karina's tragic fate was fresh in everyone's mind. Ordinary people couldn't possibly bear the energy of the Power Stone. This man in front of him was clearly not ordinary. To endure the Power Stone's energy and still appear unharmed, his origins must be just as extraordinary. Who exactly was he? The Collector's thoughts raced. As his words echoed in the room, Star-Lord and the others finally grasped what had just happened. Rocket was utterly bewildered. He really withstood the power of that terrifying thing. Star-Lord was just as stunned, still doubting whether the scene he had just witnessed was real. That stone's mere shockwaves had blown up the Collector's building, yet someone had actually withstood its power. The group's emotions surged. As they began to calm down, they realized something unsettling. Staring at the white-cloaked figure holding the stone, they all felt a growing sense of dread. Rocket cautiously asked, "Could you put that thing down? It's worth 40 billion, and we need to sell it." Before Syd could respond, Gamora quickly interjected, "This thing is too dangerous. We can't give it to Tyvan, he can't control the energy of the orb. We should hand it over to the Nova Corps." Rocket looked at her, stunned. Are you crazy? We're wanted by them. We might as well give it to Ronan, he exclaimed. Star-Lord shouted, you want Ronan to destroy the entire universe? Destroy the universe? You've got to be kidding. You're really sick in the head if you want to play hero. Rocket scoffed. What has the universe ever done for you? Why protect it? Star-Lord frowned. Because I happens to live in the universe. Gamera agreed, no matter what, we cannot let this stone fall into Ronan's hands. We should return to the ship and deliver it to the Nova Empire. Star-Lord hesitated, thinking about the money. Or, we could give it to someone who won't arrest us, has a good reputation, and would be willing to pay us a hefty sum. I think that would satisfy everyone, he added. Gamera's voice immediately turned cold. You're greedy, despicable, and treacherous. Rocket interrupted, all right, enough fighting. Shouldn't you all be asking whether this guy even wants to give up the stone? He pointed towards Syd, who was still floating a distance away. Everyone turned to look at the mysterious man in white, who was calmly observing them. What are you planning to do? Gamera asked, a sense of foreboding creeping over her. Star-Lord, Rocket, and the others all had a similarly bad feeling. The air around the mysterious figure felt intense. As they tried to figure out what to do, some even considering using force to take the stone back, an unexpected disturbance occurred. The sound of engines echoed from outside. The group instinctively turned. Through the hole in the roof, they could see a fleet of gray spacecraft descending upon them. What's going on? Gamera asked, confused. Star-Lord scanned the area, and suddenly, he noticed that Drax was missing. Loud laughter echoed from outside. You're all doomed. Drax's excited voice called out. In an instant, Star-Lord and the others understood. That lunatic called Ronan here. Does he really want revenge that badly? He's crazy. Does he even have a brain? Rocket was on the verge of losing it. They rushed outside and were greeted by the sight of countless spacecraft filling the sky. There are so many of them. He deployed this much firepower just for us. From another direction, a new voice called out. Quill. I knew you'd be here. Star-Lord's adoptive father, Yondu, arrived with a group of Ravagers, drawn by the news. Before Yondu could ask any questions, another group disembarked from the landed spacecraft. Ronan, clad in black armor with blue skin and black markings on his face, slowly approached. Accuser Ronan. Drax shouted. You're the one who sent that message? Ronan asked, his deep voice filled with confusion. Drax's voice dripped with hatred. You killed my wife and daughter. I want you dead. Drax charged at Ronan with a knife, but after a few quick moves, Ronan easily knocked him down, sending him crashing to the ground. At that moment, Nebula, Thanos' other adopted daughter, who was temporarily allied with Ronan, noticed Gamera in the distance and alerted Ronan, Gamera's over there. The orb must be with her. Ronan's gaze shifted toward Gamera. Besides spotting the traitorous Gamera and Star-Lord's group, what caught his attention the most was the mysterious man in white floating in the air. He had been monitoring this figure through underground channels for a while, which was why he had brought such overwhelming firepower this time. Ronan smirked coldly. Even if this person was powerful, with this many forces, there was no way he could be stopped. The orb was his. Buzzing filled the air as the spacecraft surrounded Star-Lord and the others. Hand over the orb. Ronan demanded, glaring at Gamera. Gamera scowled. You wish. Ronan raised his hand. Immediately, the weapons of the spacecraft extended, aiming directly at them. Rocket quickly interjected, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's talk this out. That thing isn't with us anymore, you should be asking this guy. He pointed toward Syd. Ronan, Nebula, and the others shifted their gaze to the mysterious man floating nearby. The orb was with him. Hand it over, Ronan commanded coldly. That doesn't belong to you, it's mine. I suggest you be smart and give it to me. The scene fell into silence as everyone's attention focused on Syd. What would he do? Syd glanced at Ronan, holding up the now empty orb. Are you talking about this? His mysterious voice echoed, startling Ronan. But Ronan quickly dismissed it, his attention snapping to the empty orb. Where's the stone? Ronan's eyes immediately saw that the orb was empty. Give me the stone, Ronan shouted. Hundreds of spacecrafts aimed their weapons directly at Syd, making Star-Lord and the others feel incredibly uneasy. We should just give it to him, Star-Lord quickly urged. Gamera looked grim, already anticipating what was about to unfold. Rocket gave pleading glances, hoping the mysterious man would be sensible and not make a foolhardy choice. End of chapter.